Good evening. Welcome all who are here in the audience, and welcome to everybody watching from home to our Thursday, December 1st, 2022 regular meeting of the school committee. At this time, I would invite all those who are here to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so we have a very packed agenda tonight. I would expect that our meeting may go a little bit longer than typically. We are going to start with public comment. We did, because I expected we might have a lot of people interested in public comments, so we did distribute, just to explain our public comment policy, in kind of every other seat back there. And just to kind of give a summary of that, we allow 3 minutes per speaker. It's a 15-minute total public comment period. We're going to try to stick to that pretty closely tonight just because it's such a long agenda. If there are people who want to speak that are not able to, if we have too many people, I would invite people to either email the entire school committee, or this process for budget related things is going to continue until January 19th when we vote. So I would definitely invite people to come back, because your voices matter a lot to us, and I don't want to miss hearing what people have to say. So at this time, I would ask if somebody would like to come up to make a public comment to be first. Oh. And then if you could just state your name and your town of residence, just for the record.
Name and
Town of residence.
Oh, okay. Hi.
And just, Leah is going to keep the time tonight, and there will be a chime, and I think there's a color thing, right?
It's a little music thing.
Okay, there's a little music thing that'll go off, so that, because I'm very bad at interrupting. And just so I don't want people to think that we're being rude, but as part of we don't actually interact with people as they speak as part of the policy. It feels a little bit awkward, but we do listen, and there are times when we may kind of reach back out afterwards. So welcome, Jen.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jen Jordan. I live in Holliston. I'm a 5th grade teacher at Hopkins, and I'm also the vice president of the Hopkinton Teachers Association. Tonight, Dr. Zalewski will be presenting a proposal to eliminate several service providers' positions within our school district. The HTA feels strongly that the data presented tonight is not only inaccurate, but grossly misrepresents the workloads and caseloads of these providers. It states that there will be no impact on services to students. No amounts of groupings or fancy schedule changes will negate the fact that you can't ask less people to do more work and not expect there to be an impact on student progress. Don't let anyone tell you this is a myth. It is a reality. Earlier this week, the HTA provided Dr. Kavanaugh and the school committee with corrections to Dr. Zalewski's data, along with additional data to show the real schedules of these providers. Earlier tonight, HTA leadership and the providers met with Dr. Kavanaugh to share our concerns about her flawed data and recommendations. The opinions of our experts, our occupational, physical, and speech therapists, was not only not sought out during the process that led to the decision to make reductions, but their voices as they spoke to the reality of the situation that will be created with less staff was not heard. It was refuted and disputed, but it was not heard. We implore you, school committee, to do what Dr. Kavanaugh is not doing. Listen to your valued and skilled educators when they tell you what to do, what they need, and what will happen if such reductions are made. We understand that Dr. Kavanaugh is under fire to work with a very unrealistic budget, but we know that there is not a single cut to special education services which could be justified. Our students need more, not less. They need more teachers, more boots on the ground, and in the classroom who will work as hard as everyone in Hopkinton Public Schools works every day for our students.
Good evening. My name is Lauren Passier. I live in Holliston, and I'm a speech-language pathologist at the middle school. I am speaking on behalf of all the speech-language pathologists in the district. We want to express our deep concerns about the proposed 0.5 cut to the speech and language department, as well as the 0.8 cuts to both OT and PT. On our recent professional day, we began with the district philosophy, all means all, we proceeded to see a slide that included the increasing special education population in Hopkinton. These proposed cuts, which will result in larger therapy group sizes and reduced provider availability, certainly does not feel like all means all, especially when the cuts will significantly impact the neediest students in the district. Just last year, the district recognized, agreed with, and supported an increasing marathon SLPs due to the ever-growing needs of our rapidly increasing population of students with special needs, resulting in the addition of a 0.2 FTE to the SLPs at Marathon. We are dismayed at that the proposed cuts are based solely on our face-to-face therapy time with students on IEPs, while ignoring numerous other responsibilities that still require our time each week. Some of our omitted responsibilities include completing initial evals and reevaluations, attending meetings for evaluations, IEP reviews and team reconvenes, monitoring and providing technical support and technology used with students with hearing losses and students using specialized communication devices, providing training for our staff members, providing consultation and support to families and students not on our caseload, consulting with classroom teachers around students not on IEPs. None of this work is reflected in caseload numbers. A reduction in FTEs would significantly impact the district's ability to provide these specialized supports that can only be provided by a speech-language pathologist. We are disheartened that the district administration is either unaware of these responsibilities or does not see their value. We assure you that there is not one SLP in Hopkinton sitting in their office with free time. We are all working many hours outside of school hours, writing high-quality evaluations, progress reports, planning therapy lessons, and IEPs that meet our district standards. Thank you for your attention in this very important matter.
Thank you. Is there somebody else who would like to make a public comment? Come on up.
4.5 minutes.
4.5 total.
Minutes total. So
Thank
Does
you.
anybody mind if I stand when I speak?
That's fine.
Okay.
If you could just try to direct towards the microphone, just because that will pick
Yes.
it up on camera.
So my name is Chelsea Rockhold. I live here in Hopkinton. I have 5 students in district, one at high school, 2 at the middle, and 2 at Hopkins. 3 of those students receive special education services. And I've listened to what everybody's been saying the last couple of weeks, and what I want to appeal to are the families at home who have general education students, who maybe think that this issue doesn't or won't impact them or their students. Special education doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is embedded into the core of our community at each of our campuses. All of our administrators at the buildings have done amazing work at improving inclusion opportunities for all of these kids. And I just don't think it's fair to ask anything more of these educators who have already put out so much of their time and effort. And having come from a district in California that was chronically underfunded, I know how this song goes, okay? I've seen it. It leads to complete chaos. It's just this cascade of failures across the board that our kids don't deserve, our educators don't deserve, our parents don't deserve, and you don't deserve the burden of having us go through that all together. So I have 5 kids. I know money doesn't grow on trees. I understand that there is a finite amount of money that the town gives this district, but our kids are worth it. Our educators are worth it. This can't be allowed to happen. Thank you very much.
minutes total.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Erica Segal, and I am a resident of Hopkinton. I am a part of the Hopkinton CPAC Advisory Board, but most of all, I'm here today as a proud parent of a child with disabilities, and I am here to oppose the proposed cuts to the special ed department. I'm concerned that these cuts will hurt students with disabilities and special needs, like my daughter Emma. These cuts will impact the most vulnerable students who are already struggling. My daughter Emma is 3 years old and just started preschool at Marathon. Emma is a medically complex child. She was born with a laundry list of complications to include seizures, brain atrophy, a rare endocrine disorder, and feeding complications requiring tube feeds. She has global developmental delays and depends on her OT, PT, and speech therapists to reach important milestones and to keep up in class. She is a uniquely high-needs student. Her therapists have been so vital in helping her to make progress and continue to be some of her greatest cheerleaders. So when I found out that the budget for these programs was going to be cut, I became deeply concerned. The PT program has allowed Emma to make tremendous progress in her gross motor skills. This is a child who only just started to walk less than a year ago when she was 2.5 years old and required leg braces. Now, because of PT, Emma can run around at recess. She's able to climb the playground equipment and play with her peers. To some, this may not seem like a big deal, but to parents of students with disabilities and special needs, you know never to take anything for granted and to celebrate every single milestone. Through OT, Emma has learned to complete puzzles, play with age-appropriate toys, and complete art projects alongside her peers. Speech therapy has helped Emma to make incredible gains despite difficulties due to low muscle tone in her mouth. Now Emma has enough vocabulary to ask for her favorite snacks and books. Our speech therapist collaborates with Emma's private feeding therapist, going the extra mile to help tailor therapy sessions to fit her needs. Could they still do this if their resources were cut? Students with disabilities and special needs like Emma depend on PT, OT, and speech therapy to keep up in the classroom. Our therapists have been Emma's greatest cheerleaders, always encouraging her and me as a parent. I've gotten emails in the middle of the day from Emma's therapists celebrating important milestones. Every time Emma is out sick or in the hospital, her therapists have reached out, checking in to see how Emma and I are both doing. As a parent of a child with disabilities, I feel that Emma is truly blessed to have such an incredible team of therapists, special ed teachers, paras, and school nurses. They empower Emma to not be defined by her diagnoses, but to truly shine and exceed expectations. These proposed cuts will directly impede my daughter's progress. And what message does this send to the community about how we value people with disabilities? It marginalizes Emma and tells me that she's not valued like other students in the community. Families like mine experience this far too often, but our education system should be better than this. Please vote to oppose the special ed budget cuts. Please support our amazing teachers and therapists who do so much for our students. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi. My name is Robin Malone. I have two boys who receive special education services in Hopkinton, and I'm very concerned about the proposed cuts to OT, PT, and speech services. Some of you may know that I was also the CPAC secretary for the 2019-20 school year. I'm still on the MassPAC email group, which allows for members of CPACs in the state to discuss any issues they may have in their town. One of the biggest issues facing school districts right now is attracting and retaining special education professionals. School administrators all over the state are scrambling to find OTs, PTs, SLPs, SPED teachers, and paraprofessionals. And parents are desperately worried because their children are not receiving the services that they need and are regressing as a result. Their compensatory hours are adding up with no relief in sight. My husband works for Johnson & Johnson. In the corporate world, they're calling it the Great Resignation. Workers are leaving their jobs en masse. In this climate, it's mind-boggling that we would consider cutting any of these highly specialized professionals. We moved to Hopkinton 9 years ago, specifically for the special education services in this school district. We've always been extremely happy with our boys' education and honestly feel that this is the best town in the state for special education. I don't say that lightly. We are so grateful to the SPED teachers, OTs, PTs, SLPs, and paraprofessionals who have educated our boys over the years. They are an amazing group of individuals, incredibly talented and dedicated to their students. I know that this is so much more than just a job for them. In many ways, I believe that this is their life's work. And I know that everyone in this room considers them to be a treasured part of the community. In the November 10th school committee meeting, we heard these teachers speak out about a number of alarming issues. In the preschool, the percentage of SPED students in each integrated classroom is greater than 50% for the third year in a row, violating Massachusetts state law. At Marathon, classrooms are having to be evacuated daily when there is severe behavior to keep children safe. At Elmwood, students who need one-to-one support are not receiving that support because there aren't enough paraprofessionals. The middle school and high school no longer have reading specialists, leaving this role to the SPED teachers whose schedule is already so full that with this additional workload, it leaves little time for actual classroom work with students. Children in the middle school are traveling in pods because there isn't enough staff for each of them to receive the specialized instruction they should be getting according to their IEPs. The proposed cuts would leave our remaining OT and PT professionals with caseloads of at least 60 students per therapist. They also would be forced to group 4 to 5 students per therapy session, even when it goes against what's best for the student. Our teachers, therapists, and paraprofessionals are no longer able to teach, but are rather putting out fires and managing day-to-day emergencies. They have been tasked with doing more with less for far too long, and it's gotten to a breaking point. I have a real fear that we will see a mass exodus of talent this June if things don't change now. These teachers don't need more administrators, and they certainly can't afford any cuts. They need help. More paraprofessionals, more OTs, PTs, SLPs, more learning specialists, and reading specialists. They have been asking for this help for years, and it's fallen on deaf ears. They spoke out for our children on November 10th and told us what they need. I hope we listen.
Thank you. So we have time for one more comment. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Sabine St. Pierre. I live in Hopkinton, and I have 2 boys, a 3rd grader and a middle schooler. He's in 6th grade, and they are both currently on IEPs. I understand the need for the positions that you're proposing, but as we just found out last week, my middle schooler has not been receiving his pull-out services. It's been missed. So it was only discovered because I sent the email. It was missed by the school. My 3rd grader, he is on an IEP as well, and he's going to be potentially receiving OT services, and he also receives speech and language at this point. So while I can see an administrator helping with figuring out missed services like my 6th grader, taking away services for a student like my 3rd grader and all the students of the parents that are here tonight and throughout the district, obviously we know is going to be detrimental. The repercussions on their education and the sanity of our teachers is going to be critical. Not only am I a mom of special ed kids, but I was a teacher. So I've been in the trenches. I also have friends that are teachers, and my husband's a teacher. So I know what they live every day. I know that they're overworked. And like others have been saying, you're gonna lose the educators that you already have if you increase their workload by making cuts. So I really hope that you will consider going back to the drawing board and think about, instead of cutting special ed, think about cutting the amount of caseloads our special educators have, cutting the amount of work that they do on off hours, cutting the amount of paperwork, endless paperwork, cutting the amount of emails that they have to send, cutting the amount of anxiety and stress that these teachers feel constantly, and the stress that will also be imposed on our students by having to come up with these creative schedules and putting more on the regular educators. So focus on preserving the quality of the educators we have and their sanity. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, everybody who came to speak. I hope that people will continue to stay engaged. Our process, just to outline it a little bit for people who are not familiar, is we have 4 more budget presentations tonight in addition to the presentation by Dr. Zaleski and Dr. Kavanaugh. Next week, we'll have a joint meeting with the Select Board and Appropriations Committee, and we will continue along all the way until we will have a vote on January 19th. We'll also have a public hearing on January 12th, which is a week ahead of the actual vote, so that we can invite people in to have more of a conversation back and forth, to ask questions and to make any kind of comments at the end that you feel you want to make. I would definitely invite people to continue to send emails and continue to show up. It's great to have people here. So With that, I do want to transition into our reports, and you are up first, Robert, if that's okay
Yeah.
with you.
So this past week at the high school, we had our first indoor pep rally in 3 years, which went really well. One of the objectives of pep rally is to make sure that the school is aware of all the big events happening with our sports teams. This led to an overwhelming amount of support as the whole school followed the varsity soccer team as they went to the D2 state championship. Unfortunately, they fell short of a win, but the journey was very exciting to watch for everyone. The girls' football game was also a highly supported event that got a very good attendance on Friday night. Upcoming in the high school is the winter concert series for the jazz and band and the orchestra and the chorus. The jazz and band play on Monday the 19th, and the orchestra and the chorus have their concert on Tuesday the 20th. Both shows happen in the high school auditorium at 7 p.m. And then RAD Simulations is coming up, which is a training course in which local law enforcement come to the high school and lead a class on self-defense to the women high school students. This is one of 2 classes, and the second class happens during second semester. And HHS Crisis Response Team is working with the Hopkins Police Department in process of planning an ALICE drill to happen before December break. And that's all.
Can I ask a follow-up from the last one?
Yeah.
Who won the Penny Wars?
Oh, the seniors did.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Congratulations. Any other questions or comments for?
It's just always shocking when you hear something like the first pep rally in 3 years.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
It is exciting. Okay, then we will shift into the OTPT SLP staffing and budget report. I'd invite Dr. Zaleski up to speak. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so we can get started. I apologize for my voice. It's no better today than it was yesterday. So Karen will probably do the majority of the talking because I really can't. But we wanted to start out with the storying of how did we get here? Because I think what happened was it Dr. Zaleski came, she delivered her budget, and then people didn't come and talk to us. Instead, I think that there was, a lot of presumptions that were made in our community. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight was sort of that commitment that we make all the time, putting children at the center of all we do. And while that is our first and foremost goal all the time, ensuring that our kids are getting the very best services, we also have to remember that there's sort of a tug of war, I think, in the budget process. So as we're going through that budget process, we have to remember that the school committee and our select board they give us a budget message, and this year that budget message was 5.1%. And so what we're asked to do is to keep our budget growth within that percentage. So that's always looming in the backs of our minds. Now, does it always happen that we go back to the town and say, it's amazing, we've been able to keep within the 5.1%? No. But it's our fiduciary responsibility to see what we can possibly do with the close to $60 million that the town gives to the public schools. We also have taxpayers. So you know that there are lots of different people living in Hopkinton. Some of those people are people who are in their 80s. And when you're in your 80s and you want to age in place, you'd like to be able to keep your house, but every time your taxes go up, there's a concern. But there are also people who are in their 30s, and they have a child, say for example, a 3-year-old, in the Marathon Integrated Preschool. And those people want their taxes to go up because they want the very best services for their children. So we understand that dynamic as well. And then we have teachers. And we know that all of our teachers are working really hard all day, every day. And for you, when we talk about reducing the budget in some way, especially in a personnel kind of way, it's not just a dollars and cents decision. What that is it's highly personal for you, because one of your colleagues is clearly a name on that roster of the 0.5 or the 0.8 or the 0.8. And so we understand all of the emotions that go along with that. And then finally, we realize that parents are, I think I already did parents. Parents are a huge piece of this as well. So we've got that push and pull that keeps happening, and I think what's been probably missing is some kind of civil dialogue. And I'm hoping that what's going to come out of this tonight is going to open that door. Because prior to this meeting, I met with several of the service providers and union leadership in a Zoom meeting, and we had a conversation about the numbers that are in our presentation. And the allegation on their part is that the numbers aren't accurate. But these are the numbers that we have if we look at piece bed, and if we talk to the building principals, and if we talk to team chairs. These are the numbers that we get. And so if the numbers aren't accurate, we're willing to sit with you and have a conversation to say, well, why aren't they? But at this point in time, we have to think really hard about the kids at the center of us and all of the competing interests. So we have a challenge. We have the available town budget, and we have student outcomes. And I think tonight you're going to see that we are really looking closely at student outcomes, not just for kids who get OT, PT, or speech, but for all of our students who have some kind of an education plan. The other piece that we need to think about is parity across educators and schools. So when you look at some of the numbers that we have for the preschool, you're going to see that there are tons of needs in the preschool, and of course that's true, because as we learned in one of our speakers, greater than 50% of our kids are kids who are on IEPs and who are requiring services. So those numbers are going to be pretty inflated at that level. But you'll also see that, as that you bear out and you get into Elmwood, and then Hopkins, and then the middle school, some of those numbers tend to quell a little bit in terms of some of these services. So we really are thinking about what is each one of these individual educators doing, and we tried to look at that when we put this data together. So Dr. Zaleski talked about triangulated data last time she was here. We have significant amounts of data to show you tonight. And then finally, I want to talk about the process. This journey has been ongoing for a very long time. We started looking at these numbers as far back as March. And so we keep looking at them. This isn't a decision that was hastily made. It was a decision that we keep looking, we keep thinking that when we start talking about economies of scale and we look at service providers' schedules, we believe that we are going to be able to give high quality services and the same services to our kids, and we'll talk about that tonight. So what we're trying to do in a lot of ways is to dispel some of the myth as well. So I'm going to let Dr. Zaleski talk about some of the assumptions that we feel aren't quite accurate.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh. So based on the story that's being told right now, one of the assumptions, and I'll just start at the top, is that OT, PT, and SLP services will be reduced in time and quality. And as Dr. Kavanaugh said, we did a very careful vetting look at all of the data to make this determination. And at no point during this discussion was there a conversation about how to diminish student service delivery, and I want that to be clear to the community. This was a very thoughtful process, and this budget that's being put forward, as Dr. Kavanaugh stated, is based on my triangulation of data in concert with multiple discussions with principals, team chair, as well as using our database systems. And I am happy to have further conversation with providers about that. The second assumption is that the district is paying for admin positions to support these reductions, and that's simply not accurate. In the summertime, following the 3 years of work with consultancy and the recommendations to put forth a recommendation with a 3-year plan, I did that. And that the two are unrelated. So I just can't emphasize that enough. I am not recommending these reductions to support a different need in the district. And the other assumption is that special education is understaffed, and you'll see by the data tonight that that's simply not accurate. Now, does that mean our providers aren't working hard? Absolutely, they're working hard, we know that. But as a district as a whole, in analyzing the data, again, globally, we are not understaffed. So the accurate story is that this is an opportunity to adjust our staffing and schedules for the betterment of student service delivery, and how can we do things different to ensure the high quality service continues in light of these reductions. So I want to take a look at the staffing hours and the staffing needs. So this chart that we put together, again, pulled from a database, November 9th data. This is C-Grid service delivery data. And the reason I'm showing this to you, the C-Grid data, is the majority of our services and related services are falling in C-Grid. We have some B-Grid services, which is the in-classroom services. We have some consultancy services, but the majority of our services are falling in the C-Grid. If you look down at the bottom, the total number of hours per week, the total hours per week, we divided it up by discipline, OT, PT, and speech. And so, for instance, in OT, there's 80.25 hours of service delivery, budgeted 122.5. And this is, again, from the very sterile budget process and calculation, how I came up with the figures. 29 hours budgeted of PT, 58.5 budgeted. 29 actual hours, 59.8.5 budgeted. And 186 in speech and 224. So when we look at this, we broke it up in terms of the secret services and then what the actual differences in the allocations and what this means in loss to the district. And Carol, I don't know if you want to speak about this piece.
Sure. So using the numbers on the previous slide, OT, as Dr. Zaleski said, is budgeted at 122.85. And right now, or at least as of November 9th, the numbers that we have, and I know that the association would like to sit down and take a look at them, and we're happy to do that. The numbers that we have are 80.25 hours. In PT, it's 58.5 that we've budgeted for, 29 of direct services. And in speech, it's 224.5 and 186.2 that are actually delivered. So when we take a look at that, if we think about the hourly loss, it's 42.6 hours in OT, 29.5 hours in PT, and 38.3 hours in speech. So we asked HR to translate that for us into FTEs. And in OT, it appears that we are in excess by 1.31 FTEs, PT 0.91 FTEs, and speech 1.18 FTEs. So if we were to reduce OT by 0.8, there would still be a half of an FT wiggle room. If we were to reduce PT by 0.8, there would be 0.11 FTE, and we agree that that 0.11 is the lowest on this grid. And then if we were to cut speech and language by 0.5, there would still be 0.68 FTEs. So if we add all of that up, and we're thinking about budgeting in the town of Hopkinton, if you take your 1.31 and 0.91 and 1.8, you get 3.39 FTEs. And when we look at that number, based on an average salary of $80,000, it's $271,000. That's an awful lot of money. Dr. Zaleski's only recommending a 2.1 cut, which would reduce the budget by $168,000. Again, a lot of money. And if we go back to the early slides in the storying, we have to remember that we have a fiscal obligation to the community to work within budget constraints. And so when we started to see this data, it gave us pause.
Okay. So my slides are a little out of order to your slides. Okay, thank you. So there's been a lot of questions about what does the triangulation of data mean? What triangulation of data, we never got to see it. What does it look like? This is an example of the triangulation of the data. And this is the data that I showed providers with building principals. So just to be clear to the community, triangulated the data, meaning looked at the service providers, looked at the FTEs, looked at the number of students, looked at the service delivery grids. And this is at the beginning of the budget process. And then looked at their schedules that they provided to me and put together these grids in each discipline. And then following putting together these grids, myself and the elementary principals met with the providers. And we showed them this. We went through each step on this and discussed it. Discussed what we were seeing and gave them an opportunity to dialogue at that point. Now at that point, they had asked me, can you give me these documents? My answer was no, and here's why. These are my working documents. Following my conversation with those providers, I hadn't made an official decision at that point. I was still analyzing all the other data points, and this was part of my budget process. At this point, as far as I'm concerned, anybody can have this. This is not a secret. This is how I came up with some of the decisions. So when you look at this, and I just put an example from speech, and this includes, by the way, prep time, lunch time, and all the service delivery grid, not just C-grid. So in looking at this, and again, just to the right, 18 hours, for instance, of 26.7 hours scheduled, available. 18.5 hours of 26.7 in the next provider, 18 of 26.7, and 13.5 hours were being utilized out of 26.7. In each of these categories, again, going through all the providers, again, this is just a snapshot. At the end, I then tallied, and I calculated the number of minutes, the number of hours, the number of budgeted hours, and the flexibilities in the schedules, and realized that there was opportunities to make some changes.
So I can talk to this slide. When I first got involved in this process, we had asked providers, and granted in September, so this is a September schedule, to provide us with their schedules. And so when you take a look at this, and I know it's very hard to read because it's so wildly colored, you can see that in a 32.75 hour week, this person has 13 hours of direct service delivery. And we agree that people are not going to be delivering services for 32.75 hours. It's just not, it's not part of the job. So, but what we do want to make sure people know is that we have included a lunch period every day in blue for 30 minutes. We've included a prep period. And because most teachers have a 40-minute prep, you can see this person has a couple of preps, some days a single prep another day. You can see where consultation time is built in. You can see where initial and 3-year reevals are built in, meetings, testing, annual reviews, and then you can also see the children who are being serviced. I think what's interesting and telling on this slide is that some of these kids are paired, but there's never a trio. There's never a grouping of 3 here. Most of them are singletons. You have to take over.
Sure, no problem. So most of these students, as Dr. Kavanaugh said, are singletons. Not all IEPs call for one-to-one support. Now, does that mean we're proposing that there'll be no high-quality service delivery? No. And you'll see later on in the slides, in terms of the evidence around how we can provide services differently. But students are not going to get any of their services taken away. So when we looked at this schedule and we looked at all the preps, the lunch periods, the service delivery time, as well as the additional time, along with my grid calculation and my triangulation of data, we realized that there is a room and opportunity to do things differently. And again, doing things differently does not mean students do not get their services. It does not mean we're taking away services. It means we're providing them differently. And there's opportunities here, as you can see in the schedule.
Yes, if you look at the orange boxes, those, as of September, were unassigned boxes. So they're half-hour periods where the provider had nothing assigned to them. So, very simply, we're viewing this as a problem. We're wondering, we believe, that the district is overstaffed for the number of students who require OT-PT and speech and language. And so we thought about what might be a better service delivery model, and we looked at this. So we've heard tonight from people who have said the job isn't just about direct service, and we 100% agree. So on the right-hand side, you can see that if someone were directly servicing children for 20 hours at the elementary level in 30-minute blocks, that's really 40 blocks of service time, 40 half hours. It also says in a week's time, and this is just an average, you'd have 1 hour for an IEP, 0.65 hour for a PLC, 4 hours to conduct evaluations, 2.5 hours for lunch, 3.3 hours for prep time, and 1.25 hours for consultation, and that's how you could arrive at 32.75. And if you took those 20 periods, if you took your 20 hours and you divided it into the 40 periods, 20 of those periods, if they were 1-to-1, and 20 of those periods, if they were 2-to-1, you could actually see 60 children in that time. Now, I know no one has a caseload of 60, and I know you don't see 60 individual children, but some of those kids might be 5 times 30, 1 times 30, 2 times 30, and so you're starting to fill out a schedule that way. And that's why we created this one, so that we could take a look at what do we believe, and I think you believe, is actually a viable schedule.
So we added this slide because a lot of the feedback I received was around the meetings. Like I've heard Dr. Zaleski doesn't take into account everything that we do. but I do take into account everything that you do. I've been in this district almost a decade. I recognize that you're servicing students on all the different areas of the IEP. I recognize that you're making phone calls to parents. I recognize that you're doing the consults. I recognize that you're holding team meetings and meeting with parents. But again, in that analysis that I showed you on the previous slide, all of that was into account, and there was still room in the schedules. So what I did was I pulled this. So the previous data, you saw September schedules tonight. We saw November 9th data pulled from PSPED. This data was just pulled yesterday. This is how many team meetings have been held. So we've been in school roughly 12 weeks. But I wanted you to see where I'm coming from. So we have initials. Those are initial students that may qualify. Reevaluations, which are required every 3 years. Annual reviews. And reconvenes, parents meeting to reconvene with students. The second column where it says attended by, I was actually able to pull because we have in our system who's in attendance based on the attendance sign-in sheets. So the way to read this, if you look at OT, so far this year there's been 8 meetings at pre-K, marathon 20, and so on. Same thing PT. So you can go across PT, there was 4 at pre-K, 10 at marathon, 2 at Elmwood. So if you go to the total, all the way to the far right, you'll see that for OT there was 68 meetings so far, 25 meetings in PT, and 113 in speech. When you divide that by the number of weeks and number of providers, it works out to be almost 2 meetings a week. It's 1 point something, I don't have the accurate number in front of me, but so when we say we have all these evaluations and all these meetings, yes we do, but they're not all falling all in 1 week. So again, when I look at those gaps in those schedules, and I see these calculations, again, this comes right from our database of all the meetings we've held so far this year. There's opportunities in this room. So in the next slide, we pulled this from the guidelines, from the AOT guidelines for OTs and best practices. And the reason we put these slides in there is, want to demonstrate to the community that our decision-making is based on evidence-based, research-based practices and beliefs. And I'm going to focus on the red highlight. That in schools, occupational therapy practitioners focus on academics, play, and leisure, social participation, self-care, ADLs, and transition work and skills. Those opportunities don't happen in isolation. They happen with typical peers. They happen within the classroom. They happen in other alternate settings within the school. But it's not all happening in one-to-one pullout because it's not best practice. If you go to the next slide. Services that take place in natural school settings during the routines of the school day and are most beneficial when they occur at the location and time the student is experiencing challenges. And again, students experience challenges throughout the day. Climbing on equipment outside on the playground, in the gymnasium, in the cafeteria, transitioning between classrooms, with other peers. So again, the services are designed to support all the progress on the students' IEPs. And I'm emphasizing this because I want the community to understand that when you group students, it's not grouping to hurt children. It's grouping to help children. Help children gain the skills that they need in various settings, being able to transfer those skills. Does that mean there's no opportunity for students to have individual support? Absolutely, they should have individual support where it's warranted and needed. But the majority of our kids right now are getting that level of support. And we need to be in alignment with best practices philosophically. When you looked at, I pulled from ASHA too, the speech guidelines. So again, I'm going to focus on the red highlighted. The location, speech services provided in a separate room away from gen ed classroom have long been the traditional location for speech and service delivery. This location allows for focused individual or small group service delivery, but removes students from their peers who are typically developing and some classroom instructional time is missed. If you go down to the integrated in-class service section, it says research shows that when SLP models instruct on how to implement recommended accommodations and modifications, result in include improved communication interactions within the classroom setting. So again, we just show you these slides to just emphasize that we're not making a recommendation to hurt children. That has never been the intent.
So we also wanted to include the contract language for service providers. And essentially, it's the last sentence that we wanted to focus on. The exact daily schedule would be worked out on an individual basis. And so we think that going forward, if we had our service providers and our building principals and in the scheduling process, we really thought hard about how those best practices might be manifest, the ones that Dr. Zaleski just pointed out to you. We really do believe that we can give kids better services and that the staffing is in excess. So we also wanted to talk about why the new special education director positions. We wanted to talk about this just because of that conflation, that people are believing that what we're doing is putting in these positions at the cost of other positions, and that is not the case at all. We've had two different consultants come in and work with us. The first one was Donna Simone. She worked with K-3 primarily, and I'll let Dr. Zaleski talk about that because she had the closest contact with Donna.
Mm-hmm. Right, so Donna Simone was in our district. She came in, she worked with Elmwood first and then Marathon School. She did evaluation, consultancy work, she worked with providers, she did professional development, she was boots on the ground, she came into classrooms, she conducted observations, she met with me, I participated in numerous professional development with her, walkthroughs with her, and in the end, she made recommendations, and at the final 3 years of her work with us, she sat down with administration and she gave us her executive summary. That executive summary was shared with building principals in turn, I actually shared it with team chairs, building principals then shared it with the learning specialists. HTA also has a copy of the executive summary because that was requested of me. In the executive summary, I pulled these are the two final main recommendations on it. It was a one-page executive summary of all of the work. And the first recommendation is to establish building-based instructional leadership positions in special education in all buildings. And the second was to develop a 3-year timeline to phase in new positions at each level. And this is where the recommendation came for the administration positions that I'm proposing alongside these reductions. Again, the two are separate. I brought this information before school committee in July. Spent the summer putting together the 3-year plan, I think it was maybe August, but I came before school committee in the summer and made these recommendations based on 3 years' worth of work about how we can provide high-quality instruction and what the needs are to make that happen. And again, the decision was not made lightly. It was 3 years of hard work alongside these consultants.
And our second consultant was actually an ELA analysis, and that happened at Hopkinton Middle School last year. Interestingly, in looking at ELA, one of the things that we learned is that the co-teaching model at the middle school with general education teachers and special educators needs work. Essentially what we need to do is get our people better trained in co-teaching models so that we're using something more than what we call one teach, one drift. And one teach, one drift means that you have a teacher at the front of the classroom and a special educator who goes around and helps individual students. But there are other models. You can do parallel teaching, you can do stations teaching, and I am not saying that this is the fault of our teachers because A, they have never been trained, and B, they struggle for planning time. So there's a middle school schedule that needs some revamping as well. We are well aware of these problems. It's not a teacher problem, it's a district problem. And that's why we're putting these positions into place, because we really need to make these changes, not just because we want to make them and save $160,000, but we need to make these because it's good for kids. The next slide is going to tell you that we've done our own internal audit of our MCAS scores. And when we look at the overall MCAS scores for all students, they look great. And when we look at our MCAS scores, when we disaggregate that by students with disabilities, the numbers don't look as good to us. And we want to ensure that our students with disabilities are making effective progress like their peers in this community and like their peers in other communities. We, once again, want to say we don't think staffing is the problem, and here's why. So we culled this data directly from DESE. What you can do on the DESE website is you can go in and you can choose communities that you would like to think are like you. And so what it's showing is bar graphs, and those bar graphs indicate how many FTE special educators you have per 100 students with disabilities. And so if we were low in our staffing, our bar graph wouldn't be high. Instead, our average caseload is about 11.3 students for every special educator. And if you look across the Commonwealth, that is an exceedingly great ratio. It really is. And so when you look at us up against Weston, Wayland, Holliston, Ashland, Westwood, we look pretty good. If we think about our paraprofessionals on the next slide, people will say, well, how are we staffed for paras? Again, you can see how many paraprofessionals we have per 100 students with disabilities. And that first bar graph is us. And again, we're leading the pack. We are always in the top 3 in this data. And these are very competitive districts. And then I'm going to let Dr. Zaleski talk about a 4-year budget look back that indicates that we have increased our special education staffing.
So, in looking back, and I thought it was important to show this to demonstrate that we have asked for positions and have come before the committee and been supported in asking for the positions. So, in pulling my executive summaries from previous years, I looked in fiscal year 2021. So mid-year, we added 8.0 FTEs, which included paraprofessional support. 8 paraprofessional supports mid-year in FY21. During the budget development, we added 8.2 FTEs. And as you can see from the chart, that included a pre-K teacher, 0.5 intensive teacher, 0.5 moderate teacher, another 0.5 intensive teacher, another 0.5 moderate teacher, 1.8 paraprofessionals, and a 0.5 psychologist. And this is across different buildings, as you can see. In FY22, I'll remind folks, we were in the midst of the pandemic and dealing with, looking at service delivery and who missed services and what we needed to do in that regard. So mid-year, we added paraprofessional support and nursing support, which was critical during COVID. And then we added a 0.5 intensive teacher, 3 paraprofessionals, 1 BCBA, and 0.4 OT. If you go to the next slide, in FY23, mid-year, last year, added 5 ABA paras, 1.0 special ed para at the high school. It comes to a total of 1.0 last year. We added 0.4, which equals the 1.0 at paraprofessional at the high school. During the budget development, we added 1.0 intensive teacher, 3 ABA paras, 0.2 speech, 1.0 nurse district-wide, 1.0 ABA para at the high school, and we reduced a TVI, teacher of the visually impaired, based on student needs at the time. So here we are in FY22. Mid-year, we've added the 0.6 district social worker, 0.4 moderate teacher at the high school, 1.0 para at the middle school, 2.9 ABA paras district-wide, 1.0 teacher at Hopkins, and 0.1 LPN. And during the budget development, I'm adding the director positions. So it just shows you the trajectory in terms of asking for what we need when we need it, reducing when we don't need it, and putting in the services. I remind folks that the budget process is an annual process, and annually I'm asked to evaluate the department. So sometimes we might have greater need, and sometimes we might have lesser need. And yes, we always do our forward thinking. We think with 3-year plans and projections in mind, and all the budget processes are based on our projections and analyzing district-wide, looking at trends, looking at students coming and going in the district, looking at service delivery levels and consistency. So if we go to this slide, I really want to map out the intention of the director positions. So the director positions are intended to ensure exceptional Tier 1 instruction in the gen ed classrooms, because general ed and special education work in partnership. They just do. You can't have one without the other. What's happening in general education inevitably spills over into special education, so you have to have strong Tier 1, which is your core instruction. And these administrative positions will work directly in partnership with our gen ed administration as well, and faculty. More training for special education teachers and general education instructors in specially designed instruction and co-teaching. I believe that that's a need. We want to ensure the highest expectations for students with disabilities, as Dr. Kavanaugh said. When we look at the data, we want to make sure that our students are faring and exceeding alongside their typical peers, and we have to ensure that. And these administrative positions are going to help ensure that, because they're going to work alongside with teachers and be in the classrooms. Revising schedule models. So as you're hearing throughout this budget process, there's a difference of opinion in terms of how students are being scheduled, the service delivery, the number of minutes. We can go back and forth on this, but the bottom line is we need to revise our scheduling models to make sure we're making the best use of our provided time, the best use of our time during the day. We have such a little time with these students. A 6.5-hour school day is little time with these students, and we want to make sure that we are taking all the time that we have to provide ample, high-quality, rigorous student service delivery. And that's what this proposal is about. Enhanced evidence-based service delivery model. So you saw the evidence and the research that we provided. And then we want to look at things we might not have considered yet. You know, the advantage of having directors on board to help alongside our general educators is to come to the table and have data discussions and do the things that the consultants were doing with us. Part of the reason the consultants recommended this is that the consultants said directly to me, Dr. Zaleski, you have to sustain this now. We've been here 3 years, and this needs to be sustained, because I'm not going to be here to be in these classrooms doing this every day. Every day. So every day we need people at these grade levels coming into these classrooms, talking to principals, talking to teachers, understanding what the needs are, looking at the instruction, looking at the data, and deciding how we're going to provide the best level of care for the kids. And so to wrap up, you know, the takeaway, and I know Dr. Kavanaugh already mentioned this, but we do right now, based on the budget discussion, have more OT, PT, and SLP than we need. And we simultaneously need to grow the achievement of students on IEPs. We need to work together on this. There's no other way that we're going to be able to provide this high quality service until we all get on the same page with the same philosophy about how we're providing services to students. And I'm hoping that through this budget process, we are going to be able to continue to do that.
Thank you, Karen.
So before we go, to see if anybody has questions at the table, this presentation, I assume, will be up on the school committee website where the superintendent's report goes.
We can certainly make it
I
public.
did see some people trying to take pictures. I just want to make sure people know they'll be able to access the slide deck after the fact. Do people have any questions about the presentation or anything?
I'm not gonna go first.
Okay.
I do. I'm curious. So you showed a schedule. I mean, my understanding over the summer was the reason we needed the directors was partially to bridge the gap between the schools, right? And to understand kind of how everything was working at a lower level, since you're kind of up here and having to deal with so much. Right now, do we have differing ways that special education is scheduled and dealt with at differing schools? So like the schedule you showed, for instance, I assume is for one school, but would we see the same gaps in another school, or is it kind of centralized in particular places?
Right. So if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're asking, are there different gaps at different levels, not specific to one particular level? The answer to that is yes.
Okay.
So we showed you a snapshot of schedule. The providers submitted their schedules to me. And so there's different gaps in different places with different providers, which led to the decision-making across 3 different domains.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious because like the 0.8 reduction, the reductions in a numbers way make sense, but like partially I'm just wondering how they're going to be split up across schools, across gaps, right? Because it seems like it isn't 1.8 person, right? It's small bits here and there is what it feels like. And I think I wasn't understanding that before. So, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very helpful, and thank you to the folks who attended for sharing your feedback before in email and tonight as well. Just one clarifying question. There's a lot to chew on here, but I noticed, and thank you for doing this, in the look back, I remember sitting in this seat and voting and approving the requests that you had summarized. I did see that we had, and I'd forgotten this, increased OT and speech in the last couple of years, and I just wonder if you could comment on those increases that were very recent and sort of where we are today and how the profile, the situation has changed.
Right, thank you, that's a really great question. The increase in the OT, as I said, happened during the pandemic. And so during the pandemic, the providers worked with me. We looked at our service delivery, all the providers actually. We looked at a compensatory service delivery and what we needed. And as I stated, the budget is an annual process. And so at the time, and given what we were in need of, we made that recommendation. As far as the .2 speech, it's not lost on any of us. We've come before you before. Pre-K is ever growing and exploding. And we've supported that at, the .2 at Marathon. And so I just want to be clear that, the .5 cut in speech is not specific to pre-K. Actually, a provider sent me an email asking me that question, like, is this going to happen at pre-K? I didn't answer the question because until we make a decision about whether or not this is going to get approved, we will look together and make the determination of how that's going to look. So just to be clear, the .2 was in response to the growth in the pre-K. But the overall .5 reduction was response to the district-wide data, and that's different.
And just a sort of the follow-on that I think a lot of people are wondering about is as we look forward for the next, like say, 3 years, because you do 3-year planning with the growth in student body, and we never know what specific needs students bring to the district, and obviously we are both legally and like ethically, obligated and happy to serve the needs that come in the door. But based on what you think, if you can kind of project with your professional lens, would you expect the staffing that you're proposing to cover us for at least the next 3 years, given the enrollment growth?
I would say yes, and let me tell you why. I look at my trends ongoing every year. My trends usually go for 5 years. So typically I come before you with, annual data if I'm presenting a budget. Like over the summer, I came with 3 years of data based on work with consultancy. When I look at my departmental data, I do look for trends. And I have to tell you, special education goes up and down. But despite the explosion, the enrollment growth here in Hopkinton, special education has increased, absolutely, over 5 years' time. But people come, people go. They're moving in, they're moving out. It's like anything else. But I would say with confidence that what I'm presenting tonight would be sustainable. But let me say this, and I want to say this in full transparency. If I come here next year, and of course life is unpredictable, right? We never can really tell how many kids are staying, moving out, how many kids may not, obtain the diploma, like whatever the case may be in special education, then I'll come before you and ask. The budget is an annual process. I mean, yes, we project, and I'm looking forward. And in looking forward, I feel confident with these projections that we can operate. But if I find out that I can't, as you can see from how I've asked for positions in the past, I will come before you again. And I will come before you with data, and I will come before you with my rationale. I'm never going to make a recommendation that I don't think is going to cover kids. Because if I don't have what I need, as you can see, I come before you even mid-year. And if I need to do that, I will. I'm not afraid to ask. But I also need confidence from the school committee that what I'm presenting has been very thoughtfully, carefully vetted out in the best interest of students. In the best interest of students.
I do have a question. And so I do have confidence in the data that you presented, and I feel like it's incredibly thorough. You've obviously put a lot of time, energy, thought, collected a lot of information from a lot of people. So I guess what I'm wondering is how, you have the numbers data. Mm-hmm. So why does the feels like data, the qualitative data, appear to not quite tell the same story? Mm-hmm. And so it may be, I'm a teacher, for those of you in the audience that don't know, so I appreciate and I feel the passion that we have for our students. I know that, when folks talk about taking time away from you and you're like, I don't even have enough time right now to take care of what I need to, I understand that piece. So, I know that for all of us that could be part of it, but if there's a sort of overwhelming sense of we don't have the time right now that we need in order to do the things we need to do, even though, according to the grids that you've put together, theoretically there is time. So where is that disconnect? And I feel like, Dr. Kavanaugh alluded to how we need to have these conversations, or you need to have these conversations so that we can make our decisions. And I feel like that maybe is the one missing piece that I would like to hear. Folks obviously feel something based on the work that they're doing. You obviously have presented some really clear-cut data, very compelling arguments for why maybe we are in a place where we don't need all of the staff that we currently have. Why is there a disconnect? And so I think that would be the one last piece of information I'd like to hear, just to kind of help us make this decision, so that, you know, we have, as you've presented tonight, had you come before us in the middle of the year asking for stuff, and with good reason. So that piece, I think, you know, if we do this now and then in May, we find out that we do need another 0.5 OT or, you know, of course we don't have a crystal ball. Of course we don't know if children are going to appear who need these services. But I understand that. But why is the disconnect happening now, given what you've compiled?
So I can tell you my perspective,
Okay.
because I know the providers have their perspective in the community tonight, in the audience tonight. My perspective, it's how we're servicing. So as you saw in one of the slides, we said, do we need some professional development? Absolutely, probably. I think it's how we're servicing. We've been operating in a certain fashion for a long time. You saw the number of C-grid data that I've provided to you, how we're providing services to students. It's how we're servicing. When you're providing every single person, almost every single person, not everybody, but there is a small number of students that are being serviced on the B-grid. But C-grid data, which is you're getting pulled out, when you're servicing in that capacity, sure, it's going to be overwhelming. It's going to be overwhelming because it's how you're servicing. And this is why when I present this data, I say we have to get on the same page in terms of our service delivery model in alignment with the best practice evidence that I showed you. That's the work. To me, that's the disconnect. This presentation, and I just want to be clear about this, isn't about provider quality. It's not personal. And I know it feels personal, but it's not about that. Our providers work hard. They care about kids. I work hard. I care about kids. But this is about a philosophy of how we are doing business. And the budget process has shed light on that. So in answer to your question, my opinion on it is we need to come together, we need to have these conversations, and maybe provide some professional development, look at the research, and have some healthy dialogue about what we need to do differently.
Okay, and as a follow-up to that too, these conversations that obviously need to happen.
Sure.
I'm wondering, like, the timeline for that. You know, can that happen instantly? Or is it something that has to be phased in over the course of, you know, a year or 2 years? I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't think it, to me, and Dr. Kavanaugh, you can let me know if you feel differently, but to me, I'm happy to meet with the providers and to continue to have these conversations, and we don't need to delay it. I mean, we can certainly look at our schedules and see what time allows for us to be able to do that, but these conversations need to happen. And the reason they need to happen is because you folks continually are getting letters about what is going on from their perspective. There's anxiety in the community. There's parent worry in the community. I don't take that lightly. I'm hearing parents feeling marginalized by this process. And that is certainly not the intent.
And when I met with the association this afternoon, we did make a commitment to meeting with them before we leave for the December break. So we will have an opportunity to sit with them and start to work through this.
Cool. And I mean, I say that from the school committee perspective. If from a budgetary standpoint and from a staffing standpoint and funding those staffing positions, if we were to sort of instantly say, all right, next year we're not going to have this many OT, PT, speech staff, how is that change in philosophy that you're hoping for going to be phased in? And I know that's an operational thing that we have absolutely no purview over, but I think it affects the experience of the kids, which is something that we have to keep in the back of our mind all the time. Right.
So I hate to break in before Holly gets her chance, but I have just a couple questions because you said something that I didn't know. What is the difference? C-grid, B-grid? Do the same providers do
Yes.
B-grid and C-grid?
Yes.
And
It's IEP decision making. So at the team, A-grid is primarily consultancy. It's collaboration with adults. B-grid is in classroom support, and the C-grid is pull-out support. That's the simplest way to explain it. So when providers are at the table at the IEP team, they'll make decisions about how the kids are going to get serviced in terms of the number of minutes that are provided on the service delivery grid, and then in what environment it's going to take place in.
so when I look at that grid and I see that there's empty spaces on the C grid, can the same provider have been doing B grid stuff during those empty moments?
Right, so I think you're confusing the schedule with the grids.
That's what I'm
right?
trying
Yeah,
to
there's a little
understand,
confusion.
yeah.
So the service delivery grid is the service delivery grid. That's the numbers in the minutes that we showed you.
Okay.
The empty spaces in the schedules, in answer to your question, which are questions I have, is absolutely, a lot of things can take place in those empty spaces, which is the things the providers are talking about, worrying about not having time for. But when I see it from the budget perspective, I see that's where your time is. There's more than ample time to reach out to parents, to do your emails. And remember, you should be doing that sometimes on prep as well, your prep time. But other things beyond C-Grid direct service, which we would call indirect service, would be taking place during those times.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm glad that Jen asked her question. I listened to everything you said. We were able to have access to a presentation put together by the HTA, and on almost every single slide there's a almost complete opposite story.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, and I understand how much, I'm a data person, I understand how much work goes into this.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I'm continue to have an enormous issue resolving the 48 emails we received, testimonies we've heard, about the increasing needs that we know from the pandemic. We have increasing mental health needs and communication needs, which lead to behavioral needs, right? Making these cuts and then saying at the beginning of next year, oh no, we should not have made these cuts. We are in a crisis, and we know there's a national shortage of these professionals. And I wish that, in addition, this presentation didn't really have any of the teacher feedback, teacher perspective, and it's a bit hard to. It was a bit hard to listen to. I know you say it's not personal, but in a lot of ways it feels very personal. I am, I've said it before, I am the mother of a child that has had special needs and has been helped immensely by our special education department. And I wonder, the research-based strategies that you're looking to use, I wonder how our providers will see that, right? Because we have a way of doing things in the district, and I wonder if that's going to be compatible with how all of our providers work, right? So I very much appreciate how much time and effort that you put into this. I continue to struggle to bridge the gap between all of the information I have been given from the community, from our teachers, and from the administration. And I am hopeful, and it sounds like this is something that's scheduled, and it makes my heart so happy, is that there will be time for all of you to get together and hopefully create a more integrative view of the data. Because I saw caseload again. I know that a town like ours that's a bit over-resourced in many ways compared to other communities, we're going to get some families will move here thinking, like, my kiddo needs a lot of help. This is the district to come to. So we're going to get some kiddos here that maybe some of the other districts wouldn't. Because of our reputation, we are obviously focused on academic excellence for every kid, right? And I'm just always going to be focused on equity when it comes to our most vulnerable kiddos. So I appreciate this, and I appreciate the work that everybody at the table has done and our teachers have done. But I don't know how I don't know if that I have been moved much further from where I was the last time we met. So, but thank you, and I'm sorry you had to speak so much, but thank you.
So, a couple things jump out at me. One is I am really concerned when we talk about our students with disabilities and the MCAS scores, and I'm really glad that is something that you're looking to move the needle on for next year. I know anecdotally everybody's got a different story, but I think that deeper dive, the ability to look at that and to look at what we need to do to figure out what our students need that they're not getting, that they're not keeping pace with their peers or with neighboring districts. So I applaud you for that. And back in the summer when we had talked about the director positions, I really was sold on those. I can see that there is a need for that. I like very much the both of you really pulled out that this is not they're not competing needs. We build our budget from the ground up, and it's not. We're not saying that we're taking one for the other. I love that there's going to be an opportunity for a discussion with you guys, with the providers, to kind of get the data in line, because it does definitely seem like there is a disconnect there, and I appreciate. I know it probably spent more on this year's budget than in terms of both your physical time and mental energy that's gone into this. I know that everybody here cares very much about it, and what you said about getting on the same page, I think, is really an important piece for all of us to kind of work together. I think we all have the same goal, to do what's best for kids, and that's, look forward to hearing the feedback on that conversation. I don't have, I did have one question, actually. So one thing that, and I apologize for not sending this to you in advance, and if you don't have the data, that's okay, maybe we can touch base by email, but are there unfilled paraprofessional positions or unfilled things that we have funded that we've either had people who left over the summer or like mid-year or something that I know a lot of districts are having difficulty filling? Are we having that issue too, where we're looking to hire for positions we have not been able to?
Right, so I don't have that specific information, but I mean, we have our elementary principals here, and they can attest, they can certainly attest that there's a constant need in terms of the paraprofessional, in the paraprofessional world, and I see them all shaking their head. So, and I know that because I get the emails from them also in terms of coverage, but there is definitely a need in terms of the paraprofessionals exiting, hiring. We're constantly posting and looking, if that's what you're asking.
I guess that is if that's an ongoing struggle to try to keep pace with positions.
With paraprofessionals specifically, yes, we do. And there's a lot of turnover, because one thing I'll say, and I don't know if the principals have anything different to add, but a lot of our paraprofessionals, some of them are training, especially the ABA paraprofessionals, to be BCBAs. Some of them are going on to become learning specialists. And so, although it's hard for us when they go, it's a good thing, because they're growing in their careers and they're leaving and they're moving on. And then other things occur, they get married, they move away, things like that. But there's definitely a turnover in that world for those different reasons.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this time, I think what I'd like to do is to hold off on the school committee chair report and liaison reports, because we do have a lot of guests here for our budget presentations, as well as for the ESB2 system-wide summary report presentation, if that's okay with people, just to help that. So we are a little bit behind schedule, but I want to make sure we do have time to consider everything with the concern that it's owed. So I'm going to invite Mrs. DeGo, if you'd like to come up and start. You're listed first, so I assume that was the...
I'm going to move a little closer so you don't have to sit with big space. Okay, great. Thank you for having me. It's hard to believe it's December again, and we're talking about the budget. Sometimes the year seems to move very fast, and that is this year in particular. So I'm here to talk about FY24, looking at Marathon, looking ahead, and our budget does have a 6.6% increase from last year, so I'll talk about that. The packet, you've got the summary in your packet, so I'll go over that and highlight different areas. I'll talk about enrollment. That's something that we talk about here quite a bit. So the projection for Marathon next year is 569 students. That is talking about kindergarten and first grade. It's not factoring in preschool. I will tell you, as of today, with preschool, we're 702. I'm just got a lot of preschoolers there. So right now we currently have 13 kindergarten classrooms and our class size ranges from 22 to 24 in kindergarten, and that for us is a problem. It's a challenge. When we planned and designed Marathon, we talked about our educational programming, which is a big part of what you want to do and instruct children. Our target was 18 in the class. So that's how the classroom's designed, the furniture is designed. Having 22 to 24 changes how you teach your young children. A lot of 5 and 6-year-olds in a class together, so you'll see I have some requests to help address that further down. We currently have 14 first grade classrooms, and our class size in first grade is 21 to 22. That's a good number. That's a good number for first grade. Preschool is included within the special education budget, so while I will throw in preschool in numbers, it is a special education program. While it's housed in Marathon, it's under the special education budget, so that was addressed in prior sessions. When we look for next year, we are looking to have 14 first grades, 14 kindergartens, so we're looking to add an additional class to the kindergarten level. What that would do for us is it would bring down our class size so that we could have 19, 20 in the class. And that's a better number than 22 to 24 kindergarten students. With that increase, when you increase one class at a grade level, you then have to factor in what is part of that educational programming. We have health classes, PE classes, music, art, library. So we need to increase some of our related arts educators. So we would increase them 0.1 FTE, and that would be music, art, and wellness. And that would be able to provide those students with that same comparable experience as their fellow counterparts that were already there, if you will. So that is related to the kindergarten need with that enrollment. I do have another request for staffing, which is a first grade general education paraprofessional. I know we talked a lot about paraprofessionals. In our district, we have varying levels of paraprofessionals, so what I'm asking for is a general education paraprofessional. A general education paraprofessional supports a variety of classes in first grade. We currently have 3 that support 14 classes. So the ratios, 1 paraprofessional to about 100 students. So when you think about the educational impact, we could do better than that. They are covering when teachers have meetings that you heard about. For example, if they're attending a special education meeting, it's the paraprofessional who covers the class. If teachers are needing support for things, it's the general education paraprofessional. They really are team players with us. We're fortunate that we have fantastic paraprofessionals, but we'd like to better that ratio with an additional first grade paraprofessional. So that's the personnel summary increase. When you look at supplies, our supplies are up. We're tired of hearing about supplies and issues and shrinkage, whatever that term is when it's smaller but pay more. School materials are feeling that as well. So our general education supply budget next year is, the ask is $59,822.50. When we add up and look at our supplies and add up how exactly the 50 cents gets there, it lets you know that we are looking at what's the cost, how many do we need, and the supplies have gone up, paper has gone up, a significant amount that has increased. I listed some examples of our foundations materials, our structured approach to address literacy skills. We have phonemic awareness, we have phonics, we are addressing all those 5 areas. At our level, consumables are a viable aspect of our curriculum that we need. Our foundations, children are writing in the books. Those materials, it's the power of the program. When we worked with a consultant years ago when Foundations was fairly new to make sure we were doing the best we could with it, a message we got is the fidelity is the power of the program. So those materials are essential to meeting the needs and goals of that program. An example of that increase, so when you think how many children we'll have next year, say in kindergarten, the forecast is 278, first grade 291. When you buy these in sets of 10, student consumables they're called, it used to cost $96. Now it's $126 for one grade level. Another grade level used to be $144, now it's $189. So that makes a difference when you're adding that up for our students, an increase in the materials. And a lot of our other things, the folders, I mean, even the folders, for goodness sakes, they were back ordered for a long time for us, and we had to get different colors than what we were used to. We're being very flexible with that. Sometimes we like routines and structure, and we couldn't get orange. They're two-pronged. We didn't want two-pronged. We're taking them. That's what we could get. But even those things that you don't think about, they add up. So that is the reason for our increase with our general supply budget. So that is Marathon in a nutshell.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
So is there somebody who would like to jump in with a question or comment on Marathon?
It's not, it's a question, I guess. I appreciate the need that you put in here for another paraprofessional, a general education paraprofessional. That certainly is a ratio that needs to shift. I'm curious about the cost you associated with the request, $24,000. Is that the salary for a general ed paraprofessional?
Yes.
Okay.
So when I say they're amazing and they're partners with us, they're not working to survive. I mean, they are working because they enjoy our school, they like working with our children, and that is based on the contractual rate with the paraprofessionals. So that is the salary which is pretty low.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Okay. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but sorry.
I'll say it.
Okay. But we couldn't function without them. They are essential members of our school community.
Yes. Okay, great.
So I think when I look at this, I think you've done an amazing job. If I'm looking at the consumables, the new classroom and everything, that you've still managed to keep it at 6.6%, because to me it looks like there's a lot more going on here, and you've somehow managed to kind of wrangle it down. Not a budget comment, but when I see something like we need an additional teacher and the pre-K is going up, I start to think, oh my God, we're building classrooms in Marathon, and we're still going to be underspaced and overcrowded, and so like my mind goes to, oh my God, what are the capital expenses we have to think about long term, because we need to get this under control somehow, right?
So Hopkinton is a wonderful community. It's a wonderful school. People come here for that excellent experience, and I believe it was in the capital presentation not too long ago that you have to start thinking about a separate structure for preschool.
Yeah.
When you think how many students we have a lot. We have more than we've ever had, and it's only going to continue to grow. So preschool as a whole knows I love them dearly, but it's challenging fitting everything in. So you're right. With that addition, it's going to alleviate some of our challenges, but it will not solve them for future years, just because enrollment continues to slowly move up.
Yep. So, but thank you so much. This is very comprehensible and very well done.
Well, thank you.
Just to piggyback on that, do we know when the marathon edition will be completed? What is our current projection?
So it would be sometime in the fall of '23. So it won't be open for September, which was the original goal.
Yeah.
But sometime in the fall.
Okay.
So I know what your question might be.
So now I'm giving it to you. Where are we going to put said classroom?
Right.
Music will travel for the start of the year.
Okay.
We have a wonderful cart from our center school days that will be resurrected, and the kindergarten class, while not ideal, will start the year in the music room.
Okay.
Something I know that I've had in my prior district experience, when you have a large grade level over the course of the year, you have a few students from each class to create a new class. That would not work for kindergarten. They need to develop a sense of community, a class, their routines. While it's in the music room, it'll be a little different, but we will make it work. Okay. So, and our music teacher is aware of that. After the challenges we had with center school, people are very resilient. It's not a long-term solution. She will use that card for a bit. One weekend in the fall, we're going to have a big moving day, and then she'll get her music room back.
Okay. So my related question is, are we okay with whatever it is that we need to outfit the new classrooms for use? Because I don't see additional, the consumables, and those are sort of like the normal supplies. I know we had
PPE or FFE, or I know there was a
FFE.
I know there was furniture or something. So are you okay?
Yes.
Are you covered?
So because of having to create spaces where we shouldn't necessarily have spaces, the furniture that is in those spaces will help us with this kindergarten class, because the addition will come with some FF&E, that furniture, fixtures, and equipment that will help outfit that. So we will be okay.
I was trying to figure out the E, so I got the F and F.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Yeah, so. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Somebody else?
No, I think I agree. This is you're creating a whole new class, and this is incredible. And that music room is super fun, so.
It will be
Yeah.
super fun.
Yeah.
It will be.
I remember
What's
my kid
tricky
loved
is, where do I put the risers and the music
Right.
stands that are in there now?
I was thinking about the
So
risers.
I'm trying to tuck things as much as I can elsewhere, because we will want them back someday. So
Yeah.
that's a good challenge to have.
The lobby.
Yeah, I could. I love having a lobby. We absolutely could.
Singers in the morning.
Yep.
That would be fantastic.
Quick question, how many kindergarten paraprofessionals gen ed paraprofessionals do we have now?
7.
So I was thinking, the reason I asked that is because back when you were at center school and there were increasing numbers of students in the classroom, I believe we had one paraprofessional in each kindergarten classroom. I know it was a little different because there weren't bathrooms and whatnot, but I always think if I see numbers going up, I want to make sure that we're
So then it would be, the way we schedule our paraprofessionals, right now we have 2 classes that share a paraprofessional. One is primarily based in one classroom. However, we adjust over the course of the year where one class might need a little bit more help at different times than others.
It's appropriate the kindergarten does good sharing.
Yeah, you are right. You are right. Taking care of others is how we phrase that, because the kids will see adults helping each other, and just like with our expectations that students abide by, we say we adults take care of each other too.
So we also have Jean Birchman from Appropriations.
Yes,
I don't know
hi,
if you have
Jean.
any questions for Lauren.
I have no questions.
Anything else before we move on to to Elmwood? Sorry. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mrs. Carver, welcome.
Thank you. Very excited to be here. So I know that you've had the opportunity to look through my very brief summary. And so I'm not asking for anything more this year than I asked for in the last budget cycle. Technically, I'm asking for $1,239 less dollars based on the student numbers, which is how we put our budget together. And each year we use projections and those numbers to put together what we think we're going to need. I do have some, if you noticed in my summary about the numbers, we're already, so this year in our 3rd grade, for example, we have 314 students. Our current 2nd grade has 314 as well. And the next year's 3rd grade is projected to have 310. So unless lots of folks are moving out, that number might not be correct, although I still have to create a budget based on the numbers that are given. So we're projected to have 6 less students, which is why the budget comes in at a little less. So what I'm saying is that what we asked for this past year is really serving us well. The materials that we need and will continue to use will serve us well. And I really think it's super important that I ask for what I need, so that when I need it, you'll take me seriously and give it to me. And as you know, in the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to be asking for lots and lots of things. So I'm not going to ask today. So last year's budget, we used materials and consumables for ELA and foundation science and math. I didn't mention social studies, and one of the things that 3rd grade teachers came to me this year was for, the request was to have social studies texts. And not only did they want new and updated texts, I can't say it, but they wanted one for every student, which seems like a small request, but not something that we currently had. So what we use now is classroom teachers share a set of textbooks, and the teachers said how nice it would be if each student could have their own. And so I anticipated putting that in this budget, which would have been about $23,000 of an ask. When I learned the happy news that that request would actually belong in Mr. LeBrod's budget, you know, I humbly ask you to approve his budget so that social studies texts can be purchased for the third grade. And you know, I think it's important to mention that some really good things are happening at Elmwood that are free of charge, and we depend on some of that. PBIS continues to be a focus of our attention, and this year we're not only using a Tier 1 system to support students, but a second tier as well. We've created an SEL screener. We know that students in the pandemic really struggled with SEL, so the counselors at Elmwood have created a screener. We've instituted a kindness club this year, which has been fun. We're using green, orange, and white tickets this year instead of just white. Lunch tickets are green, and they hold a special currency for students' bus tickets that are brand new starting this week. Our bus drivers have got on board with giving kids and whole buses tickets. So we have bus captains, and our buses have been a problem this year. More so than I think in the 10 years I've been here. I've never seen such tricky things happening on the bus. So we've created, Michelle Tynan, the new assistant principal, did a bus video with students. Students from every classroom were brought onto a bus during the school day. Lynn, our dispatcher extraordinaire, took kids for a little ride. They modeled how to appropriately sit in a seat and look out the window instead of climbing over or under or the other things that sometimes happen. We shared the video at our first meeting of the Eagles. Kids also did a little skit at the meeting for everybody to talk about. This is what bus ridership should look like. And so those things are all coming under the heading of PBIS. And the other really exciting thing that's happening at Elmwood School is and I think I've mentioned it here before, but just wanted to give a shout out today too, about the grade 2 and 3 teams working with Carla Burley on a CLOC study, which is a Center for Intelligence at Yale Center, is putting together this study that 6 teachers at Elmwood School have agreed to participate in. They're wearing a video camera that sort of spins as they teach, and they're really they haven't learned to do anything different. They're just teaching the way that they do, and they've been brave enough to wear a video camera to do so. And their teaching is going to be sort of discussed in isolation somewhere else, and then come up with some SEL looks for us that people across the country, I think, will eventually benefit from their work. So they're brave, and it's exciting work. Katie Farrar, Lauren Cook, Carrie Patterson, Beth Newton, Bridget Marzilli, and Christy Mortarelli have agreed to do this work in their classrooms, and families have been brave enough to say, yes, my children can also participate. So that's something really exciting that we've got going on that doesn't cost us anything, but the gains are going to be enormous. So that's really all I've got.
Thank you. Questions?
Nitpicky weird question.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with the budget, really.
Yeah.
It's just my math brain, is driving me nuts. So when I'm looking at the Elmwood School's current and the Elmwood School's projected, the average is going up even though the number of students is going down in the same number of classrooms.
You know what I think?
It's causing me all kinds of issues.
It's possible that if you are you looking at, there was a typo on one of the ratios, and I don't know if that's if that's the reason for that.
Okay.
But I made a change in the summary report. There was a typo in the averages.
Okay. Other than that, I think it's wonderful that you're making do with what you had last year. Working with you this year, I can see how conscientious you are about everything. And just like with Center School and Marathon, you're making do with some really difficult situations and doing a great job with it. So I really, really appreciate the way you've thought through the budget, and I do look forward to working with you some more.
Thank you. The numbers are essentially, they're very similar, 6 different. And so it's not that we're I don't want to give the impression that we're going to make do with little. We last year were able to ask for what we needed, and really that's enough. So that will sustain us, and so we'll continue to have all of the strength in the programming and the materials and the wonderful books, if we can get them. Will be.
This was the first I heard of
Please, please. So there is a little ask, but it's not going to come out of on this paper.
Just more pressure on you.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Well, when I read this, I had a bunch of other people in the room, and it's the only time I've ever read something budget related and laughed out loud. And I was like, "Is she serious?" I know, it's great. Yeah, so I'm glad that you're able to piece it together, especially this year when things are going to be really tight. So thank you for your efforts.
I'm not sure I believe the projections for next year. I mean, I'm just saying it would be like very nice if they stayed very flat. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I'm assuming that we will just
Well,
absorb
and
as
I did ask, Carol and I talked about it, we would need to get 32 more students in grade 2 to need to add another classroom.
Okay.
So, I don't want people to worry overly much. 57 in 3rd grade before we'd need to add another section.
Thank you.
As anyone who's listening to Elmwood building conversations knows, we don't have another classroom.
Right.
So that's good news. That's a significant number, and I think we will have move-ins, so our ratios will go up, and those are okay numbers for 2nd and 3rd grade. Would 18 be good? That would be wonderful. But the teachers really, when I call a teacher and say we got a move-in today, and I'm going to add to your class, you'd be so amazed and pleased with the things that people say. Well, that will give me an even number, and everyone will have a partner, is sometimes something that someone will say. So I really appreciate that thinking, because it isn't easy to adjust on the fly, but people do. And
Thank you for those numbers too, because that all summer we always watch.
Yes.
And we watch by grade level, and we always ask Dr. Kavanaugh, when do we need a new classroom? And so those seem to be. That seems to be enough cushion based on what we tend to see. So that's
if it were 3 more people move in, I'm going to need another classroom. I don't think I'd be going around with that.
Yeah.
But with the numbers that we looked at, we've got some space.
I just also wanted to thank you for bringing up the bus situation, because it seems, I think coming out of the pandemic and different behaviors, and a lot of our students are struggling with what seemed to be sort of normal before was the bus, but you've got a small space with a lot of kids and stuff and energy, and it's great that you've been able to take a step back, revisit the bus, and reintroduce the bus, because I think coming out of the pandemic it seemed like it's really important.
And that's a PBIS. That's a part. The most important part of PBIS is to sort of look at your data, whether it's literal data or anecdotal. And for us, we probably could have come up with the numbers. The first thing that we did, because kids were coming to the door and saying, hey, guess what, every day. And there could be 10 kids who desperately want to tell us their story about the bus. And so a few days went by, and we were, no, come on, get to class. And then Mrs. Tynan and I said, something's going on, and we cannot just send a child off to class without finding out, because there are conduct reports that drivers will give us. And so we think if it's really important, a driver will tell us. And then we sort of shifted our thinking to say, but it's important enough for them to come through the door and say, hey, guess what? So we made conduct report slips for children, which was really eye-opening, and kids were coming through the door and filling out a report and talking, tattling on their neighbors, their best friends, and their siblings. And so some of it we were saying, thank you for telling us, and some of it we were saying, what? And calling kids in. And then we realized teaching needs to take place. That's where the video came from, a skit. We invited the drivers to the meeting of the Eagles so that they could see what we're teaching, because there's a little bit of a disconnect. The drivers might be allowing behaviors, thinking, well, kids will be kids, and not really recognizing that we're expecting this, and this is what we're teaching and holding kids accountable for. So anyone who's struggling with that, we'd like to do some teaching around that. And some of the drivers are saying things to us like, well, I don't want the child to get in trouble. And we say, well, the trouble will be if a student gets hurt. We want to teach them how to behave so that everyone can be safe. So it's been interesting and good work, and I hope to see some change.
That was a really good point. I hadn't even thought of it, that some of these kids, if you think about K in first grade, they've never ridden a bus until second grade.
Yeah.
Wow.
My daughter's never ridden a bus.
Wow.
She's like,
Yeah, it's interesting.
I love that you ask the kids. I mean, how empowering and how wonderful to know that you're a safe person to talk about hard things with, even if it is like my friends being jerks. Like,
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I
Wow.
love it.
And I think we realized that we don't want to send kids off to class with a heavy, for them, story about what happened, even if it was just someone wouldn't sit with me.
Right.
We realized that if we could give them a quick outlet, they could focus on more important things.
Okay. Anything from appropriations, Mrs. Carver?
Overall percentage change from last year to this year?
Budget?
Yeah.
4%.
Thank you.
You can get ready for that question.
Thank you, Susan. Anything else?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mrs. Bilello, welcome. I feel like we sort of matched tonight. Look, that was.
Yeah, we all got the memo.
This was not planned.
Good evening. All right, so I'm in a position that's a little different than Mrs. Carver because, as you know, the last 2 years I have come here and you keep asking, are you going to add these extra classrooms? And I said, we don't have any more classrooms. You know, Hopkins School is set up with 24 classrooms along with the 4 modulars we built in FY21. So we're at 28 classrooms right now. However, you also know that I shared at our school improvement plans that we are at 25 in our 4th grade classrooms already this year. And so we're around 640, 642 students right now. Projections for next year are about 685. So there is just no way without, and I do want to thank all of the members of our school council as well as central office and definitely the HTA and the teachers at Hopkins School because we had a lot of conversations and I was honestly resistant. I was looking at going up to class sizes of 27 to 28 because there are ripple effects. The reality is there are 28 true classrooms at Hopkins School. 28. And within my request here, as you can see, this is taking us to 30. Which is going to have ripple effects. And I had an opportunity to walk around with Dr. Kavanaugh and Ms. Ruthermick and Mr. Person a couple weeks ago and show them kind of my vision of how we'll make this work. We already don't have conference rooms at Hopkins School at all. All the teaching spaces and the rooms that we're talking about that we would turn into these other 2 classrooms right now have between them 5 professional staff members and 7 paraprofessionals sharing those 2 rooms. And so all of those people need to move to other spaces. So I did have an opportunity to kind of say what our vision would be to make this work. It's tight now. And so when you're adding another potentially 40, 45 students, it's not just the classrooms. And I think that's the messaging. Yes, we've added 4 modular rooms 2 years ago. But when I think back that we were sitting at, under 500 when I came to Hopkins, and we're now talking about close to 700. It's a completely different school. And that's not just the classrooms. So when we talk about my budget request for 2 additional classrooms, that's to maintain our overall class size right now. So we would still have approximately 23 per classroom. And as Mrs. DeBow shared, those come with additional costs as well. And so that was part of the conversation with school council because some of you, I don't think, maybe just Nancy was on school committee. Last time we had the conversations where we were looking at potentially having to make some changes to our music program. And I am incredibly proud of the music program at Hopkins School. It is fantastic. It's my happy place. You'll find me playing saxophone with the band or in doing our, in a general music class when I need to get some happy time. So I was very concerned about the idea of really touching our music program at all. So when you look at our additional FTEs beyond the 2 classroom requests, those related arts, the 0.4 FTEs here would allow us to obviously fund the additional needs and wellness, but also maintain the 2 sections of course. It's going to be tricky, I'm not going to lie, again, because we're going to a full week schedule of PE. And if you come down to band, we have, I think it's 37 saxophones alone. So our band is gigantic. And so the only space that we can do that is in the gym. And if you're envisioning that we have 30 classrooms that all need 2 PE classes a week, there's going to be some logistical scheduling challenges, but I'm 100% committed to make this work because I think our related arts in Hopkinton are one of the things that really sets us apart. We are incredibly lucky that our children get to have such a robust curriculum, including our academics. And so that's the 2.4 FTE requests in terms of professional staff. I have also requested an additional FTE for a second math tutor. We have a model at Hopkins right now where we have 1 math tutor. That is the same 1 math tutor that we had when I entered Hopkins School as an assistant principal with 400 under 500 students. And if you remember back to my presentation that I collaborated with other colleagues on differentiation at Hopkins School, we are incredibly committed to a workshop model for math and ELA. And in order for that to happen in math, we try to use our general education paraprofessionals to push in for inclusion, but we also really have to have a robust response to intervention program. And with the addition of Shelley Moran as the math elementary director, she and I are collaborating every single week. We are looking at data, we're making adjustments to groups, and we've added those. We're incredibly limited with just the one math tutor position. So by adding a second math tutor, we could create a much more robust response to intervention program. And this has a lot of ripple effects. We're talking about special education tonight, some of those needs, but the reality is we need these other highly skilled professionals. We do have a Title I district which has allowed us to have some ELA tutors, but the reality is to do that work in math in order to differentiate in at 4th and 5th grade. Those of you who have had students coming through Hopkins, it is a very rigorous math program. And in order to maintain that, but also give our students who are struggling, not just the single dose, but the double dose, that can't happen in the math room classroom. We have to provide that at other times in the day, so they're really getting more math time so that they can close some of those gaps that they may have. So that's where this second, the addition of the second math tutor is coming from, so that we can, in reading, we have our reading specialist, which is a paraprofessional, working alongside our ELA tutor. It's funded through Title I. This is to have 2 math tutors, which are paraprofessionals, but they're highly qualified in, have many of them that we have working for us in our district are retired teachers, teachers who have chosen this for a different pathway. And so we're incredibly lucky, but they just can do more than our gen ed paraprofessionals who, if you talk to my teachers, and again at school council, one of the biggest challenges, and I think Lauren spoke to this, is that our gen ed paras have to cover for all our meetings. So when you think of the numbers of 504s we have, the number of IEPs, and many IEPs result in 3, 4, 5 reconvenes or meetings a year, every one of those we need to cover with our gen ed paras. I want to ensure that we can continue with this double dosing in math with 2 math tutors, so that the paraprofessionals can provide those other supports that are needed in the building. So those are the requests for personnel, which come to a 9% increase. As I said, we haven't had a personnel request for the last 2 years because I was trying to hold off because of that space concern. But we're at a point where we're bursting, and we can't maintain the model and the integrity of a workshop. It's really challenging to do. And if we were to go up to 25, to 27 from the 25 that we're sitting at 4th grade, I'm struggling to imagine how we could keep a workshop model close to 30 per classroom. In terms of expenses, we are also making some adjustments in our science curriculum and have worked with central office. We're going to make some shifts in that. We've been seeing some great results in our MCAS, even through the pandemic, in terms of our science scores. And we're just looking to upgrade to actually use some of the same curriculum that the middle school does, so that there is more continuity to that. We already do a lot of things similar, but we are going to be launching and utilizing Discovery Education as our science program. When we adopted STEM scopes back 8 years ago, there weren't a lot of options that were aligned to Massachusetts frameworks along with the national science standards, and Discovery has come a long way. They also have recognized that there are some districts, like Hopkinton, where we have incredibly large schools. And so doing the per student license, which 8 years ago was not possible because we have large schools, they now offer a different rate, which is really a one school price, which then brings the cost way down when you're talking close to 700 students in a school. So it's much more cost effective, and now something that we can pursue. So we always liked Discovery Education for science. We thought it was a more robust program, but it wasn't cost effective 8 years ago. Now it will be. So that's a big curricular change. In terms of the supplies listed here, since that's coming out of central office's budget, it is a level funded, but for the additional students. The biggest caution I have is, as we all know, costs of everything have gone up with inflation. So there are some pieces of that. And you'll notice that we do have a request in here for, because of the 2 additional classrooms, those are not right now outfitted with what you would need to have it as a classroom. And so working with Ms. Ruthermick and Mrs. Picard, our amazing administrative assistant at Hopkins School, we've worked to figure out how we can do that in the best way to outfit those 2 classrooms. Unfortunately, all those times we kept coming to you and saying we would look in the basement. Well, Mr. Person and I have looked in every basement and every storage closet at this point. We really do need to outfit these 2 rooms.
Little FF&E.
And so that brings our overall school increase to 9.3 for Hopkins School in our requests. 9.3%. I'll take any questions.
Okay, that's great. Anybody want to start that? Jump in?
Sure. So I'm going to go to Holly's love and statistics thing here for a moment, because if you look at school increase of 9.3% compared to the 5.1%, yeah, that's a big difference. However, I grew up in Miami in a very large, not within city school, but close enough, where we had 27, 28 students in a classroom, and it was very easy to get lost. And the teachers were overwhelmed, and they couldn't give students really more than 5 minutes, if that. And so the students who had the hardest time tended to get the most attention, and it was definitely not the ideal experience that we would want to see in Hopkinton. So I very much applaud you for taking the step and creating the 2 classrooms we don't have.
Correct.
In order to try to keep the kids at a level where they will actually get the attention that they need from the teachers. And obviously that's key. So as hard as the percentages, it's very valid. And
Yes.
I can't imagine how you could possibly have gotten it lower given the situation you find yourself in.
Right, and we've had ebbs and flows. So if you look across the elementary schools each year, and some of it's been based on space and where those enrollment bubbles are, but we're there, we're tapped out. 2 years of not requesting, but our numbers have gone up by about 32 or so each year. And so that's why we're now pushing 25 and 26 in our 4th grades.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Somebody else have?
I mean, I don't have any questions. You spell it out so well. And I think, like, as you just said, you haven't asked for anything. You've been absorbing the kids. I mean, you're still going to have 23 kids in a classroom.
Correct.
So even though, you're asking for 2 additional teachers and and all of the related arts that go with it and the equipment, it's still 23 kids in a classroom. So, I mean, you've done so much with so little for so long, and now you've hit that point where the seams have burst, and we need to be ready to step up and fill
Right.
that. Yep.
Which is why we need to turn to the conversation about the buildings, because, well, we've had those modulars on, all 3 of us can speak to the classrooms in the hallways, and some of our most needy students, that's where they're working. And just like my colleagues, Mr. Cotter and I will be sharing a conference room next year. We'll be giving up our offices and sharing a space together. And our educators are already doing that. So the reality is that the space, the lunchrooms are full. It is a busy place all day long. But we're proud of what we do with those spaces, and it's a happy place.
So one quick addition to the question, since you brought that up, the capital request for the addition to Hopkins, that's for this year, correct? This coming year. How long will that take to actually come to fruition?
Well, funny.
If we get it funded.
Funny you should ask. I think you'll see an update on that next week.
Well, thank you. But just based on that, if it takes 2 years, we've seen how the building in Marathon has taken forever because of the current supply problems and everything. So if it takes 2 years, what situation are you going to be in? And is there something we should be thinking about to mitigate during that time frame to help things out?
So we are going to be looking at utilizing, some of you may remember we did a HEF grant a couple of years back to transform our library, and one of our solutions right now, we're actually going to be putting up a partition in the back of the library that is going to become a literacy center for some of our educators to use. So we are going to be taking from the library about a quarter, maybe 20% of the library to become a space that some of those people that are being displaced from upstairs are going to go to. And again, the rest of that's the shuffle. But if it were to take longer and we were looking at needing to add another classroom, then you start to look into music art spaces that I've been committed to try not to hit. But the music or library fully would be the next place we'd have to look at.
Okay, thank you.
If there's a bright spot, though, the third grade class only has 314 kids in it right now, so even if we had 20, we're still ahead for next year. So hopefully, we're trending in a direction where we're not going to add 100 kids to the third grade class. Even if we added a handful, we'd be okay. Better anyway.
Right.
Okay.
I agree with everybody else that this, it's obviously a really difficult process, and I really appreciate that you have been saving these really special spaces like music and library. I also appreciate how resourceful you are with searching through old crusty basements and whatnot. And thank you for making such a very easy to follow, very logical budget for us.
And I would just add that not 9% is a lot, but in a way I'm relieved because we've been watching this for a few years, and every year I'm like, please, ask. And I know you've been clinging to the team structures, and so much of what makes the culture and the academic environment click.
Right.
And so, obviously respecting you as an educator, and that was your priority. So we've known that it's tight. And we appreciate the resourcefulness, as everyone said. So I have no doubt that this is necessary. I know it's going to be a big adjustment and, more resourcefulness. But the other thing I'll say is that we have begun to hear from the community within Hopkins a bit about grade configuration. We're getting some feedback on other things. And across the board, people just are thrilled, and they praise the culture and the environment at Hopkins. So kudos to you for
there's 100 staff at Hopkins, so I wouldn't want to say we also are blessed to work with an incredibly wonderful age. So it's a lot of factors.
Yeah.
And with 2 additional classrooms, you talk about the teaming structure. I think it's really critical in buildings. It's hard for me to see a school that was under 500 where I could say after 2 years I knew every kid's name. It's really, really hard now. Things like principal's cabinet, doing our CARES cards programs. We're doing as much as possible. Our memory book photographer team and our design team, they all grow every year because I want to add as many kids because 4th and 5th graders crave these leadership opportunities and ways, our green team. So we're finding lots of ways to keep those kids all engaged and so that they have as many adults in the building that they feel connected to, because this model, you know, there are challenges to it, as you all know. And so to be the 4th and 5th grade school right now in our national park team identity, I guess if we get to 30, Mr. Cotter and I are debating what our national, there is going to be another national park team for the first time in a long time. And I have my choices. So yes, I think we will be adding a national park team at 5th grade.
So that's a little bit of a cliffhanger as to what it is.
Exactly. You'll have to wait and see.
Well, we loved Hopkins when my son was there, and there was a national park theme when he was there, and so good luck with that.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. I do appreciate all in your presentation as well. I did want to ask if Appropriations has any questions.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our elementary school principals. I'm going to shift out of order because I realized that the elementary school building committee people have been here waiting very patiently, and we're about an hour behind. So we're going to hold off on the on Dr. Kavanaugh on the central office budget, and then bring up for the ESBC system-wide summary report presentation from Mr. Bell.
It may take a second for us to get hooked up here. While Chris is getting set up, I'll just introduce myself. I think I've met most everybody. My name is Robert Bell. I'm with Perkins Eastman. I'm an educational planner and programmer. I'm joined by Dan Colley, who's sitting in the audience, project manager. And of course, everybody knows Chris Eberly with Vertex.
Most of you know me. So Chris Eberly, I'm the senior project manager for the Elmwood project with Vertex. Formerly Compass, we did the Marathon Schools, the OPM as well, as many of you know. So we're with you tonight following yesterday's discussion about grade configuration. Yesterday's discussion was more public facing, and so today we thought we would focus more on what we're specifically looking to you folks to provide and to give you an idea of the path that we've taken to get there. We'll review some of the context that we looked at last night. We pared it down slightly and made it more topical for this discussion. I think we want to sort of provide the context of how we developed the study, as well as providing an overview of the process and sort of how we'll get to the ultimate results. I know we got a number of questions from you, and so we'll answer the ones that we're prepared to answer already. And we want to sort of explain how this all fits into the MSBA timeline as well for the Elmwood School project, and the parallels, the decisions you have to make about grade configuration, why we entered into this study in the first place. So some of the upcoming milestones, and this is somewhat of a combination of some of our latter discussions about the educational plan, but I thought it made sense to sort of talk about it all in context. In December, we're looking to, we have a developed draft educational plan, and we're going to speak about that more later this evening. That's something that's going to become part of what we call the preliminary design program, which is the first submission that the town makes to the MSBA related to the Elmwood School project. We're also going to, we'll touch on how we'll be submitting that at the end of next week, and we'll be looking for a vote on the educational plan, and we'll cover that in more depth later in the evening. But really, this is the start of the process to get us to a debate that's going to occur from now likely until mid to late January, where we'll ask you to make a decision about the grade configuration that we pursue at the Elmwood School on January 19th. That's really the target date that we've set to run in parallel with how the ESBC is running the Elmwood project, so that we can make the right decision as we move into the next phase. That will ultimately result in selecting a configuration that will move forward as we make our second submission to the MSBA, and eventually resulting in the project that we'll take to the voters of the town to see if they would like to advance. Oops, if I turn this. So this is the timeline of where we are overall. You can see that we're currently about to submit the PDP in December of '22. You can see our acronyms that we like to use: the preliminary design plan, the preferred schematic report, as well as the schematic design report are the three main milestones in what overall is the feasibility study process with the MSBA. We just finished our third forum, and for folks in the community who missed the first two, they are available on HCAM, so they can go back and revisit them if they missed something. As part of those forums, we have asked the community to provide some feedback, and so we expect over the coming weeks, particularly when we come back to you, I believe on the 5th, to talk about this. We'll try to share some of the things that we heard as a result of that forum from the community. But ultimately, we get to the 5th and the 12th, and that's really the bulk of the deliberation about the grade configuration. And so we've planned to deliver the program that you've asked Perkins Eastman to put together sometime around the 22nd, so that you can have some time to look it over and really begin in earnest discussing it when you come back to your meeting on the 5th. So I wanted to sort of talk about what those three parts are, because I think putting it in context is helpful when you're having the discussion about the various parts that we're going to ask you to vote on. The first step, the preliminary design program, is really what can work. And it's where we look at developing a program using the benchmark of the MSBA's space program guidelines. We customize that to Hopkinton, so we know the size of the spaces that inform the size of the building. We also develop the educational plan, and we'll talk about that more in depth, but essentially that is how you teach students in Hopkinton today and in the future. And then beyond that, we do some test fits, and those test fits aren't necessarily fully developed designs, but it's a way that we can look at, with the size of the program that we're looking to develop and the things that go into that, can it work on a site? And so all of those come together in this PDP submission that we're going to put forward, and we'll pass that on to the MSBA, and they'll comment on the various elements of it. At that point, we're going to take some relative costs of one site versus the next site, one scheme versus the next scheme, to understand how one scenario has a cost related to another scenario. As we move into the PSR, that's really when we figure out how it will work for the town. We're going to look at specific schemes on the sites that are selected to move forward at next week's ESBC meeting, and we're going to get comments back on the original educational plan, that the draft that you vote on, from the MSBA, so that you can take another look at what they've learned from all of the schools that they've built throughout the state, and really use that information to arrive at an educational plan that you want to move forward with that next submission. We'll have discussions about some of the cost drivers. How much sustainability does the town of Hopkinton want? How much, how do the different schemes work for what the town of Hopkinton wants? And ultimately, we'll arrive at a general cost and a general scheme that we'll move forward into developing as a schematic that will eventually become, at the end of the day, the project that the town will vote on as a developed schematic design. So I'll go through this fairly quick, because I know we talked about a lot of this last night and it's already going long. We all know that growth is a problem. I don't think I need to even hit the high points just from your budget discussion tonight. 26% in the last 10 years is a lot of people, and it changes the character of the town, and it certainly changes the character of the schools when a lot of those people are young families. We put this out there because we thought it was a fun way to break the ice, but it's really something that this committee knows all too well. You know that just from your discussion that the Hopkins School is that helmet, and the kids that are coming into it don't quite fit in it anymore. And with the budget discussion you had, you heard about how the principals are using the tools that they have, even though they might not seem right when you look from a distance, for the size of the problem that they've been trying to deal with and adequately dealing with for a long time. So we thought that this was a really useful discussion, because what it really shows is the waves that move through the school district as you have that growth. So below the line, you can see the brightest red is the biggest percentages on this overall chart, and the darkest blue is the biggest negative percentages on this overall chart. And so they generally moved with each other. You had a down year and an up year up until you hit 2013. From that point on, you had so many more up years than you had down years. And these waves, as they move through, you can see here, this strong red wave moving through, it doesn't have the same offsetting negatives that some of these waves down at the bottom had. And it's a way that you can both look at how your enrollment has grown, but you can also see what's coming. You know that if you have a fourth grade now that's very large, it's going to be a fifth grade next year that's very large. If you have that 26.6% in pre-K and that 15.9% in kindergarten, those are going to be your kindergarten and first grade next year, plus the extra kids that are coming into town who aren't part of the special needs program that has them in pre-K. So these waves really tell a story, and what that story is that up until about 2017, it was somewhat balanced. You had those surge years, but it was offset by a smaller grade. And after 2017, we looked at this final line as sort of the cumulative growth, both in the numbers in the middle and the percentage at the end. And so even though you might see a small number like 1.6, if you have a 1.6 and a 4.7 and a 4.8, even with the 1.8 after it, the percentage overall effect of how much your community is growing is something that needs to be accommodated. And I think that led to asking Bob to do this study that we're going to present tonight. So as you know, it's a parallel effort that we're doing with the Elmwood project that informs the Elmwood project. You all know that you tasked Bob with it, so I don't need to touch on that, but what I really want to touch on is the date. We're really trying to deliver the report to you guys to consider by the 22nd, and that will give you time to review it and consider it so that you can begin that real intense debate about how you want to move forward on the 5th. And the goals that Bob's going to try to address is, we want to understand the needs of the district, and he's done a lot of work to study that, but we also want to understand how grade level affects the things that the district can manage as they move forward with the challenges like you heard tonight about Hopkins. So we'll come back to these later, but I'll turn it over to Bob so that he can speak to sort of where we are down.
Great. Good evening, everyone. This chart that you see here has made its way into a number of presentations and documents, but what it charts is your current enrollment in all the grades and graphs them into your current grade configuration so you can see the size that you have now. And then we look forward at the projections, and we see both the current configuration as well as the alternative configuration, which would be an Elmwood 234, which of course affects Hopkins and the middle school. This is part of the MSBA agreement. It is part of the study. And so this is what the system-wide study will be looking at, the projections in both of the grade configurations. So just to talk about the system-wide impact study, the purpose is pretty clear. It's to understand these projections, how they manifest into space needs, how those space needs might take shape. So we'll be charting both grade configurations and solutions that would apply to each of the schools. The process that we've gone through, this is a work in progress right now, but what we've done so far is to document your existing schools. They're constantly changing, and you can hear that tonight with the principals' reports. But we've taken a snapshot of what the spaces are being used for now, so we can understand the size and the count of rooms. We've also looked at the interior circulation at all the schools. We know there are some constricted areas, and we just wanted to document some of those issues that are nested within the schools, as well as plumbing fixtures. So the fixture counts, but also the distances away from maybe some remote classrooms. So together it paints a picture of what are the space needs, what are some of the constraints within the school. And so when we look to these solutions, we'll be trying to solve more than just spaces. And when we calculate the spaces, the process, the methodology that we've used is to start with the MSBA guidelines. Those are certainly what the Elmwood School as an MSBA project needs to follow, but it's also space standards based on best practice. The MSBA guidelines themselves, the space summary template that they have, anybody can get it online. You can plug in the enrollment. It back calculates all the spaces you need. The problem is it's not specific to any one district, so things like a 23 versus 22 student class size are relevant in calculating those needs. So we've modified it to be very specific to Hopkinton. There are other things as well, choices on number of lunch seatings that you would want to target. Those are pretty obvious. There's also a lot of other things in the formula. So we've made sure that it's Hopkinton specific, but we've also met with the educational leadership and the principals to talk about some of the spaces that maybe might not meet the standards but can can maybe carry forward, or if there are other increases needed that might not be just calculated or obvious through using the MSBA template. So we're making this very specific. I'm going to go through where we are right now, some example diagrams, and then we'll also talk about the next steps. So this is just an example using Elmwood where we've charted the program. You can see it's color-coded for what's classrooms, art, music, special education. Of course, we've footnoted where things like an office, like Ann's, is used for multiple staff and professionals, so we're keeping track of all that. The next diagram is kind of what we call a stoplight plan. So this is just looking at the existing enrollment, looking at the existing spaces and saying which ones, the ones in red, are significantly deficient, not based on the space standards or the needs. And you can see the media center here shows up as red, as well as the kitchen. The cafeteria, based on 3 lunches, is also undersized, not as severely as some of the other spaces. You can see the majority of the classrooms here are green, and that means they meet the space standards. And although they would ideally be larger, they do meet those guidelines. We've also recorded here where a certain number of gym stations are required. The current gymnasium would satisfy those. If we look at the projected enrollment, we can see a bit more red. We now tip ourselves into needing a 3rd gym station. For every 30 classrooms, you would need, basically for arts and for music and for wellness, which occur 1 time per week for every 30 classrooms. You can do that in 1 room. You have 30 periods you can schedule in. As soon as you have 31 classrooms, you can no longer do that, and so a 2nd room is required. For PE, it's 2 times a week, so it's...
And this is for the current grade configuration. It's not for a 2-3-4 and a 2-3-4. You would need a new school. We found through examining the ad reno that you can't renovate the existing Elmwood on the existing site with a school that would have all 3 grades.
So again, these are examples of some of the documents that we're putting together. This is the diagram that looks at circulation and pinch points and stairwells that are maybe not adequate or not sized well enough. They're congestion areas. We see the plumbing fixture counts and if there are deficiencies there. So this is part of the graphic recording of what we're finding. This, I realize, is not readable, but this is the MSBA space template. From left to right, it starts with the existing conditions. In the middle are the proposed, and there are 2 different grade configurations we've charted. And then with the MSBA guidelines on the far right, we've also charted those with both grade configurations. So it's a snapshot to look at what do you have now, what do you need, and just benchmarking it against the MSBA. We've also tried to highlight where we've had to override for Hopkinton specific. So the bright yellow that you see there is where the MSBA template does not calculate.
And obviously, as we get to the final report, you'll be getting a copy of this that you can read.
And a narrative form, so it's not all graphic images. This chart here shows your current schools across the district, and what we thought would be good to see is the planned enrollment. So for Marathon, we've already factored in the addition that's underway. We've included the modulars in all the schools, and so that we can see that with the class sizes that are ideal or targeted, we can see the planned enrollment for each school, what we're calling what would be the planned or as-built enrollment. And we can see that versus current enrollment. And what this tells me is that the modulars, the additions, the things that have been planned are keeping pace with the increases. You're meeting the needs that you need to at the moment. But part of our charge is to look ahead at the 10-year projections, and we can see that in all cases, the enrollment increases are more significant and will require more space. This chart here starts to show us a lot on one page. What we see in all the gray rows are your current configurations. The beige rows are showing us the new grade configuration. From left to right, we can see the existing enrollment versus the projected enrollment, and we can see the existing gross square footage versus the projected. In the projected gross square footage, we put to be determined because it's based on some assumptions. So if we know you need a certain number of classrooms in addition to what you have now, we've applied the rule of thumb, which is a 1.5 net to gross, to say that might be this much gross square footage. We hope that when we get into the actual additions and diagrams that we can be more efficient and more effective. And so those will actually, those numbers will change and hopefully be a little bit smaller. What we think is more important is to see in the last 3 columns shows you in terms of classroom needs. So the number of classrooms that would be needed for the projected increase, the number of related art spaces, including gymnasium. So we've footnoted where an additional gym station would be needed. That in and of itself is an additional 3,000 square feet. And then we've kept track of some of the other notes, if the cafeteria needed to increase, or administration, or other spaces. So this is starting to chart for us in simpler terms, what are those needs? And graphically, if we were to see what the gross square footages would look like, the top row of schools going left to right shows you your current configuration, and then the bottom row shows the alternative configuration. And as Chris had pointed out, what we learned was we cannot do an ad reno of a grade 2, 3, 4. There's not enough room. There are too many constraints on the site. It would be too many stories tall, 4 or 5 stories. And so that is why in this diagram we see a new construction footprint. This is an example, a sketchy example that would be more polished, but this is the type of thing that we might see as the next step. The literal additions, the repurposing of space, to meet those needs. This is, again, only a work in progress and has not been vetted, but we will first chart these. We will sit down with the educational leadership and the principals again to go through what these could look like, and then we'll start to refine them.
And so if I can just put a finer point on that, what we've shared with you thus far is we chose Elmwood as sort of the benchmark, but this is the level of detail that we've looked at. We've had Perkins look at all the schools. And so the final report will have this for each of the schools, and also a bubble diagram type of layout that's an evolution of what we're showing you here on the screen, so that you can understand the recommendations that the plan will make in terms of what those schools could become as they begin to look at them a little deeper.
And then just circling back on the bigger enrollment increases, as Chris had pointed out, what's projected is a 22.2% increase. And one of the things that we feel is important to highlight is the project in hand now with the MSBA, the Elmwood School, at the current grade configuration of grade 2, 3, addresses about 16.2% of that increase. And at a 2, 3, 4, it addresses about 83.8% of that increase in one project. And certainly a consideration.
And we made that same point last night, that what this is really saying is the town is looking at building an Elmwood project, but the study is showing us that we'll have to make changes to all the schools based on the increased enrollment. So this 83% is really telling you is that an existing building project that's cost shared with the MSBA has the ability to absorb 83% of that overall enrollment growth within the various schools as a cost-shared financed project, and it makes the other modifications to the other schools, it makes them less dependent on those changes to their building, because so much of that enrollment challenge is going to be handled within the Elmwood project if you choose the 2, 3, 4 school.
And I think there's a large appendix that I can go into for question and answer, but I just want to reiterate something else that Chris said. Our goal is to start to round this out and submit a full draft report on the 22nd of December, and then come back to the school committee on January 5th to present that and to answer more questions and see what other refinements we may need to make.
Any questions? It's a lot.
So based on what I'm seeing, I'm like really looking forward to the final report. It's clearly very thoughtful and very thorough. The question that pops out at me just from the little we've seen is, right now we have plans to mitigate the Hopkins issues, so like space issue. If we do a 2, 3, 4, and if we have a separate pre-K, now we've mitigated some of the elementary school issues, but that still leaves the high school. And based on that, it's 200 kids over the maximum that the high school should have. So, dude, is that coming up? Like, are you thinking about what other capital expenditures we need for the high school in order to? Can you go back to those numbers, like the what current the?
So I think the slide
Yeah.
that you were, the slide that he's on here, I think kind of probably explains the potential the best. So in other words, one of these slides had a circle around the Elmwood, Hopkins, and the middle school. Because if you move into that lower tier and are able to do a 2, 3, 4 school,
right,
pull the 6th grade down into Hopkins, you've now opened up, you show that deficit, or basically you've now opened up space within the middle school. And that's where we'll have to look at that sharing between the middle school and high school to alleviate the pressure in the high school.
Okay.
So, basically sharing the square foot need at the high school with what we've now freed up at the middle school.
And my apologies, there's a typo on the screen. So in a 2, 3, 4 in the bottom row, that would make Hopkins a 5, 6, and the middle school a 7, 8.
So that's the slide that really kind of is a big
Right.
piece to the story.
And that's still 30K GSF that we
And
need to make up even if we do the sharing, right?
And again, I think it gets into programming.
Yeah, okay.
Just to piggyback on that, first of all, I'm excited to see the results of this. I think looks like exactly the kinds of data that we need to figure out where to go. When we originally in 2019, I think, had a first pass at this with our original enrollment projections with Dr. Wagman, we received back some preliminary sort of high level, well, maybe you could do this, or maybe you could do that. And those were more to what Lee is talking about, things like a grade 9 academy, or if if you did like a 2, 3, 4, 5, I think was one of the options then, which I know is not on the table now, but then what could you do in grade 9 and, sort of a little bit more, still 50,000 foot, but kind of options for us to consider. And I guess I'm wondering, piggybacking on Leah's question, will we get any options? Like, for example, if we do decide to stay with 2, 3 for Elmwood, facing everything downstream, what would that look like? What options would we have then? Or if we do the 2, 3, 4 and we do the 5, 6 and the 7, 8, programmatically, I know that we have to look at like space and maybe connecting and, maybe putting some kind of shared space between the middle school and the high school, but what would that look like programmatically? Like, would it be like a grade 9 academy? Would it be, will we get any insight into what that might be? Because it is, when we're asked to vote in January on what we do for Elmwood, I personally want to feel very comfortable that there are decisions downstream that make sense to me, like when I'm casting that vote. So I guess I'm wondering what kind of recommendations you'll be providing. Or options.
Yeah, so the study, so we will, that's one of the reasons why it'll be a little bit iterative and we'll want to get a little bit more direction, but our initial charge is to look at the 2 configurations and look at how those space needs can be met, and we do understand from our conversations that with the proximity of the high school and middle school, for example, and seeing some of the, what might be available space depending on which configuration it is, those types of things will be crafted into it. We haven't been asked, it hasn't been identified to us to necessarily come up with
shape it, like,
shape it in a different structure or kind of format, but we obviously we'll take our direction from the leadership.
Any other questions before we move on to the next piece of this? Thank you.
Thank you.
So that moves us then into the Elmwood project grade configuration discussion.
I'm going to see how far I get.
So while we're doing that, I just want to, if I can just put a plug back in of something from the last night's forum. The reason we're discussing grade configuration here is that grade configuration is one piece that the school committee actually votes on as opposed to what the SBC 2 is voting on. So this is something that we will continue to talk about between now and when we vote on it in January. January is a big month for us.
Oh, it's a big month. All right, so I'll see how well I do, and if I have to hand it off to one of my two colleagues, I've shared this with both of you, just in case I get weary. All right, so there are 4 parts of this very quickly. Physical plant additions to date, the demographer's predictions, and I know you've seen them many times, so I won't belabor that. Social and academic progressions for our kids as they go from grades 2 to grade 8, and then efficiencies and advantages of a 2-3-4 school. So our PE and Vertex folks just shared with you that our spike really begins in 2017. In 2018, we opened the doors to the Marathon Elementary School. In 2020, the MSBA accepted our SOI. We were invited into the pipeline. 2021, our school additions were completed, 6 stick-built classrooms at the high school, 4 modulars at Hopkins, 4 modulars at Elmwood, and in 2022, 4 classrooms are currently being added to the Marathon School. So based on the numbers you saw, right now all of our facilities are kind of at equilibrium. Right? What we need them to do, they're holding on to. But you know that when you start to look at the demographer's projections, whether it's Dr. Wagman's or the MSBA, they are putting us at 5,000 students by the year 2030. So the buildings that we have, they just won't sustain. So part of your responsibility, as you know, is to look at grade level configurations. And you just saw this slide, but you can see what happens when you can absorb a lot of students in a 2-3-4 school. So last night we talked a little bit about the social and physical development of our kids. So when we think about our kids in grade 2, they are progressing into more complex social lives. They become a little choosy about their friends. They start to develop a nice wide variety of social skills, and they're growing their independence. When our kids, they're able to take on responsibilities such as chores, a lot of independence in the way of dressing themselves and getting from one place to another. In grade 3, friendships become more and more important. Our kids are developing physical, social, mental skills, and those are happening very quickly in that 3rd grade period. It's a really critical time for kids to develop confidence, and they need to do that in their schoolwork and sports and friends. And 3rd graders like to start making their own decisions and figuring out where they fit into their school community. Generally speaking, our 2nd and 3rd graders start to have less focus on themselves and more focus and concern for others. By the time our kids get to grade 4, it's a really interesting year. So they are good at navigating through social rituals and routines. They learn to enter play. They know the rules. They can establish membership in a group. And they start to get to that place too where they're a little preoccupied with friendships and start to recognize boy-girl differences. It's also that place where some of our kids start to depart from just regular old childhood. So some of our 4th graders are still messing around with Legos, and others of our 4th graders are, thinking about pop culture and thinking about crushes and that kind of stuff. If we think about kids on a 5-6 level, our 5th graders now at independence, they love it. They crave it, they want to be with their friends. And because it's 5th grade, and some kids have matured more quickly, some kids have different interests, they start to become a little upset when new allegiances are formed and friendships dissolve and new friendships happen. Typically in grade 5, that's the average age of onset for puberty for girls. In grade 6, those social characteristics are really hard to miss. They are obsessed with the opinions of their peers. They lack a lot of interest in the opinions of their parents. They can be a little bit moody. They start to become more quiet, a little more introspective, and 6th graders can be awkward. And so it's especially exacerbated when our 6th graders, who are awkward, are immersed in a 6, 7, 8 middle school, because when that happens, you've got boys who have been through puberty in the 8th grade. They have facial hair and deep voices, and our 6th grade boys really do still look very much like children. So I think it makes it hard to be a boy in a middle school. Grade 7 becomes that transitional time. Kids are really pretty much leaving childhood at that time. Boys typically enter into puberty in grade 7, and boys particularly face difficulties with things like organization and motivation. And when we start talking about academics, you'll just see how important all of that executive functioning is for our kids in grade 5, 6, and then even further developed in grade 7, 8. In grade 8, the kids are turning 13 and 14. They're full-fledged teenagers. A lot of the choices that they're making around social development are the kinds of choices that could impact them for life. They know the kinds of peer groups that they want to pursue, and kind of finding that ideal group can be difficult. Sometimes they fit in, sometimes they don't. Longtime best friendships, some have grown up faster or slower. They look for different things. Sometimes they stay together, sometimes those friendships dissolve. But certainly by grade 8, our kids are thinking about relationships and dating. In terms of academics, our teachers are generalists in grades 2, 3, and 4, and that's been the situation for a while here in Hopkinton. In grade 2, our kids are still learning to read, and the curriculum might transition very slightly, where kids in grade 2 need to actually use that reading to learn. Our math lessons are pretty challenging. They include things like pattern, graphing, geometry, fractions, measurement, addition, and subtraction. And kids are starting to get experience with word problems. So when that happens, again, the reading piece is just so important to them. Grade 3, a good transition year. Even though our kids are still learning to read, reading becomes a much more independent activity. Texts get more challenging, sentences grow in complexity, vocabulary gets harder. And so our kids are also asked in grade 3, and I know it seems unusual that an 8-year-old could do this, but they are actually asked to draw inferences, which is a really hard skill. In math, great complexity, but I think the interesting thing about grade 3 math is that notion of the journey to a solution becomes more important than the solution. And what teachers will say, that if a kid doesn't understand the why of the math, they don't understand the math. Grade 4, again, teachers are still generalists, but the curriculum becomes richer and deeper. The emphasis on basics of how to read, it's still there, but it's, if you think about it in terms of proportions, in grade 2 it was here, and learning to read and reading to learn, it's probably the opposite in grade 4. So even though they're still learning to read, that reading is so important because it's going to help them access curriculum in places like social studies, science, obviously ELA, and even math. The kinds of comprehension questions get more challenging, but so too does the inferencing. And math also growing in complexity. I won't read you what the slide says. Grade 5. In grade 5, academic strengths and weaknesses really start to come to light because the curriculum really picks up speed in things like math, language arts, science, and social studies, and our teachers at that point become specialists. And it's a good thing for our teachers to be, because with the complexity of the curriculum, it's nice to have people who are just passionate about something and they really understand it richly and deeply. If Hopkinton were to go with a 5-6 school, our kids would, in grade 5, would be transitioning classes for each period. I think one of the nice things about that is if you're a kid with ADHD, you get movement, You go into a classroom, you hear a new voice, you might get a just slightly different style of teaching, and it forces the executive functioning. When kids are moving and they're responsible for recording homework or gathering their belongings, they need to make sure that their executive functioning skills are good. And so it starts to develop in grade 5, further develops in grade 6, and by the time they're in 7 and 8, they should really have pretty good executive functioning skills. In grade 6, literacy instruction demands super high levels of competence. While reading and writing have been a huge focus for our kids all the way from kindergarten to grade 6, it's now the expectation that kids are starting to do what we like to think about in the way of disciplinary literacy. They're starting to write like scientists, they're starting to read like historians, they're starting to speak in the language of mathematics. So all of that happens in grade 6. It's a really big transition year. Our 7th graders are expected to read very complicated texts. They start to write, especially literary analysis papers, of length and complexity. They are completing science projects and social studies projects, and they're expected to do those things with a lot of independence. 7th grade is a huge year for reinforcing study skills, because our kids are going to be expected to study for a test outside of the classroom in some of those content areas, and identify their kind of learning styles and understand their abilities, how much they have to invest. All of that will happen in grade 7. Also in grade 7, these are 2 important pieces for Hopkinton. Math becomes leveled, and our kids are choosing a world language. And because we don't use an experiential kind of model, it's not as if we're a school district that says, you can try a half year of Spanish and a half year of French. When kids go into that world language, it very often stays with them through their high school years. And then finally, academics in grade 8. This is the place where literacy is a precursor to high school. Those kids are being carefully guided through texts, and they're working on persuasive writing, expository writing, literary analysis. Very big push on that, because we want to make sure they are ready for high school level writing. And high school level writing in all of those disciplines are going to demand those genres. Math continues to be leveled. Kids continue to work in that chosen language. And in grade 8, I think our kids are really thinking about their high school trajectory, identifying areas of strengths, passion, interest, and then identifying the things that they're not so good at and deciding, do I want to become better at that, or is that something that is more appropriate for my peers and not me? So I think what I like about those slides that we just looked at is it sort of shows a kinship in those grade levels, which pleases me if we were to go for a 5, 6, and 7, 8 schools. And they could run concurrently, they could run parallel, so that there could be interaction between them, but we could really think hard about what does a 5, 6 school look like developmentally, and what does a 7, 8 school look like developmentally. So I'll just go through some of these efficiencies. In terms of busing, if we could eliminate the duplication of bus routes, that would result in shorter rides. And as Mrs. Carver told you tonight, busing is no day at the beach. But what we have right now is we've got kids who are on buses going to Marathon and Elmwood, Marathon and Hopkins, and kids who are going to Elmwood, and those buses kind of follow each other through neighborhoods. And if we could eliminate that redundancy, it would be wonderful. It would also be nice to mitigate a little bit of traffic by eliminating the crosstown busing. If you think about Pleasant Street at any point in the day, when school is either getting in or getting out, and there are 5 schools that are getting in and getting out, I joked last night it becomes Unpleasant Street because you can't move on that road. So if you could eliminate that by having all of your schools on Hayden Row Street, and I know it feels counterintuitive to what people are thinking, but what our traffic engineer said to us last night is with changes to the road infrastructure and enough queuing space inside to accommodate parent traffic, busing traffic, and teacher traffic, you won't get that backup. He has done studies that show that you're not seeing backup from Marathon and Hopkins. You are seeing backup from the high school, middle school run. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's just no room for cars in that high school parking lot. Okay, we would be moving Hopkins, a 5, 6 school, to an 8 o'clock start. I know a lot of 5th grade parents find that attractive because their kids can get out and go to ballet class or trombone lessons. And now it's tricky. So a lot of 5th grade parents are saying, we just go and pick up our kids because we have no other choice if they're going to take part in extracurriculars. Again, just running those developmentally appropriate parallel schools. We've already talked about that. And PE and Vertex have talked about sharing the costs for 3 grades rather than 2 grades. It's an amazing efficiency and can result in literally millions of dollars for the community. In terms of shared personnel, if we could keep K-4 shared personnel and specialists on one campus so they could move seamlessly between the new Elmwood and Marathon School, I think it would be super helpful. You'd be reducing travel time and thinking about sharing special educators, ESOL teachers, those kinds of folks that are music teachers, people who are highly specialized. In terms of coursework, if you had a 7-8 school, some of our 8th grade kids could kind of dabble in some high school courses, and whether that means photography or a drawing course or even a high-level math course or advancing in a world language if they have present with the readiness. Finally, sustainability, developing a green school in keeping with our community's values, and finally offering, I know a lot of people have said, well, what will happen to grade 6 if you pull them out? Will they lose extracurriculars? But I think we have a great advantage there, and that we would have the opportunity to offer our grade 5 kids extracurriculars as well that really meet the individual needs of that age group. And so that's what we talked about last night, and I know I've moved through it very quickly, but I appreciate your letting me rasp along.
Thank you. Questions, comments, thoughts?
So I come from a, kind of the more traditional school district, K through 5. So I find it kind of hard to think about why this is such a hard thing to talk about. Like in most places, K through 5 are together. So of course 2 through 4 can be together. But I think there's one really big positive for kids of special needs where the kids mask their special needs. And I've brought it up before. Usually 4th grade is around the time where a child who has been able to mask their special needs suddenly just can't do that anymore. And so their curricular behavior changes, like they start to get maybe lower grades. Their actual behavior changes because they start to get frustrated. And when you're walking into a new school, and from the beginning you see that behavior with a child, you have one view of the child. But if you have a school where it's 2 through 4, the principal, the previous teachers, everybody in that school has seen how this child behaved until the point where they hit that grade. And now they see it in a very different light. They see it as, oh, there's been a change. There's something going on, and can kind of dig into it differently. So in that sense, I think the continuation from 2 to 4 for those children specifically who mask really well their special needs may be a huge benefit. I think the other thing that I really liked, because I know this has come up from parents before, is this ability, if we go 2 through 4, of being able to get some high school classes for the 8th graders. Because this has come up with parents several times. Even during the COVID times, there's been a lot of, frustration with certain parents who have children who are eager and probably capable of doing a high school class. And even though the high school's right there, the child can't bridge the gap. So being able to offer that to those children, I think, would be a huge benefit. So those are sort of my thoughts on this. Like I said, I just find it very difficult to think of it as a stumbling block to have a longer school, since in most places that's how it is.
I would be interested in what the folks that are in schools every day feel about. It would be like a pretty sizable culture shift within all of those schools, having 2-3 versus 2-3-4, particularly at Hopkins, which we all know has a lovely climate and culture for that particular age group. I think that one of the essential questions I'd love to hear for providers, for principals, like how would they feel managing this like different grade level? Because obviously it's different needs, as you've highlighted, different priorities and different needs,
and that is one of the things that came out of the visioning.
Yeah.
Right? We did talk about how, that is one of the things that we talked about this last night. You can't fix that with this model.
Right.
So if I had spent my entire career as a 4th grade teacher,
yeah,
and now I was being asked to move buildings, it's, there's a sense of loss for sure.
Yeah, of course. And I wonder, I wonder if like there's some way to mitigate some of that. And I do agree with the 7-8. One of the things I understood about the middle school is that their scheduling makes it really difficult for the kiddos to kind of access higher level classrooms at the high school. So I wonder if we're going to try to sync those kinds of things up, make it possible for those 7th and 8th graders to go into the high school with a lot of complicated like exceptions for these students. But yeah, I think this is good information, a lot of developmental thought, right? Yeah. That's it.
You've done a great job outlining all of the, I think there's so many advantages to the community in terms of, from a cost perspective, this is going to be a great savings to the community if we do this. Instead of having to do several building projects, this narrows it down a little bit. From the students' perspective, like you said, I feel like moving the students into a different grade configuration, I think the kids always handle stuff better than the adults. And so I think they're going to be fine. I think that they will do it, and you'll have a couple of grades, and then it'll just be normal for them, and we'll move on. But I do think it is, I think the teachers and the administrators, the building administrators, that's where the really huge change is going to be. And, those folks, the 4th grade teachers would feel like they're leaving their family, and so too would some of the 6th grade teachers. Right. So you have these two groups of folks who are leaving, and then other groups who are feeling abandoned by those groups. So I think that shift is going to be the tricky thing. But I think it's hard, there's so many advantages to it that it would be a hard sell in my head, at least at the moment, until we hear from some of the folks who would be directly affected, for me to think that we couldn't overcome that somehow to take advantage of all of the possible benefits from the model that you presented tonight.
Well said. Yeah, and I personally I also am comfortable with a K-5. That's, I get the continuity that you get in it, when more grades are together, and the familiarity with the families and the students and so forth. I guess for me, the two biggest questions, I love the idea of putting 6th and 5th together, because I think 6th graders do get it's a little early to be with the 8th graders. I think so many things make so much sense about this. So my two things, the size of the school, and it'll come down to the design and how we make it feel with all those children. Like, how do we have like the right cafeteria spaces and so we make life feel small and cozy, even though we are co-locating 3 grades. And I think of it that way, as co-locating 3 grades, because I feel like we're going to have sort of mini communities, I'm hoping. But I think that is a huge fear in the community, that's a lot of kids. And how do we get them ready for dismissal, and how do we get them down to lunch, and it's just a lot of young people in one space. So I think that's a challenge with the design, and the design is in good hands, so that's good. And to echo what Jen was saying, I think figuring out how we work with the in-building staff and so forth. And I don't know if you could comment on how the community, the school community, the administrators and teachers and staff are currently connected to this work. I know there have been some faculty forums, and I don't know if it spans all grades or just Elmwood. We had some questions about that, so I wonder if you could just talk about that.
So when we started with the forums, we did send out information to everybody, indicating when the forums would be, and we invited everybody district-wide to join the visioning team. So, and then I think every time we're going to be having conversations at one of these meetings about, we'll be talking about grade level configuration, whatever, we do send that information out. So I think, I mean, I don't know if you remember back to opening day, even in my slide presentation then, you know, we had conversations about, here we go, you know, we're going to start talking about what's going to happen with an Elmwood replacement project. So I do think we send out a lot of information. Interestingly, those, whether it's the visioning, I think in the visioning we had one teacher who was an Elmwood teacher, and I think at our forums, even, you know, PE and Vertex, you can talk about this a little bit, but when we house them at the Elmwood School, and they are typically at 4 o'clock on a weekday afternoon, and there are a couple of Elmwood teachers who come consistently. Sometimes there'll be 5 or 6 Elmwood teachers, sometimes just 2, but the very first one, I think we might have had people from around the district, and there might have been about a dozen, but then after that, interest kind of dropped off.
I wonder if maybe, I think for the community too, it's getting real. Like, we're talking about the meat and potatoes now, and I think it's hard when life is busy and everyone's focused on doing what they do every day. It's hard to connect. But now that it's getting real, I'm hoping we can sort of reach out again to all the schools, because the middle school, everyone's going to be impacted in the district, and maybe just reconnecting and making sure that they feel that they have an opportunity to weigh in.
Sure. So I had the opportunity, because at the forum last night, to see this, and I appreciate all the ESBC2 forums that have gone, all 3 of them. And I know there's another one planned in January. We had also talked about early on in the process adding in maybe a school committee specific forum. I wonder if with the report coming back on the 5th, if maybe we want to look at the 12th to open it up as a public forum to allow some folks to come in. I don't know if we would have the ability to also do a staff specific one in the afternoon as well, but that might be a nice offering. And also for people to know at home, and I say at home because everybody here pretty much is part of this in some way, that these grade level configuration discussions really have just become part of the public process. It's people that were not at the earlier forums before yesterday really did not, that was not the topic of conversation, but it is going to be the topic of conversation here quite a bit between now and when we voted sometimes towards the end of January, I think, right? So that was, and Holly, did you say anything? I'm losing my mind because it's getting late. Did you want to add anything? I didn't mean to cut you off. That's my.
No, thank you. I have one more thing.
Yeah, go right on.
It was just a thought. So another big positive, I think, about having multiple grades. I'm thinking back to when my kid was in kindergarten, 1st grade, in a school that was K through 5. So the 1st grade, for instance, did a little post office for Valentine's Day, and all the grades would pay for stamps, and then the 1st graders would deliver the cards to all the different grades, so they got to know these children at all the different levels and really established relationships, which is also, I think, very enriching. Right, so for both the older children and the younger children to get to know each other and to kind of learn that patience and the kind of delight of what it's like to interact with children at such different ages. So there's a wealth of possibility, I think, that starts when you have a 2, 3, 4 school of getting all those different grades to interact in new ways.
I also think of the ability to do things with 4th graders reading to younger kids,
right,
or things,
exactly.
Opportunities for leadership. There are definitely a lot of things we can kind of add into this discussion as we move forward. Right, you up for the next part? Your voice going to make it?
I hope so. So I know that you've all read that document, and maybe it would be helpful if you just post questions, so the document is the educational plan, and Mrs. Carver and I have spent a very, very long time working on this, and I don't want you to think that we were doing that in isolation, because when you get to the portions about what you want physical education spaces to look like, or music, or those kinds of things, all of the people who are SMLs or even departments worked on them together. This has,
You want me to?
oh yeah, if you want to stay here for a little bit, Chris, that would be great, because Chris is kind of the expert on this. So this will go off in the PDP, the preliminary design plan, off to the MSBA. In no way, shape, or form is this thing taken right now as kind of gospel. What will happen is the MSBA will get it, and they will pull it apart.
Can you say what kind of a person or body at the MSBA will pull it apart? Are they educators? Are they building experts? Like, what sort of group will
That's a
give us
question that I
feedback?
don't know that I can answer. What I can say is that the MSBA, since they were formed, has done about $16.5 billion of construction in the state. So they've done schools throughout the state. They've seen a lot of different ways that different districts choose to do their educating of their students. And I think the comments that they're going to bring back to you are going to be largely in that context. They're going to look at how you've chosen to say that you educate your students and ask questions and make suggestions for you to consider when the educational plan comes back to you. And I have one slide here. I'll sort of just speak to it if I can get it to go into presentation mode. There we go. So it's Dr. Kavanaugh started the introduction, but what I would say about the educational plan is that it's a roadmap for how you teach today and how you would like to teach tomorrow. And it's something that you're going to put together so that you can inform the designer about how your school will teach its students. And that's useful information for them. I'm sorry, I'm just finding my notes. Because we're going to, as we mentioned, we'll submit it as a draft and they'll review it as part of the PDP submission and return those comments to us so that we can incorporate that into the schemes that we're developing as part of the next phase. And we'll finalize it at that later date. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind because this is really your first go at this plan. It's not something where you're making a decision now that you have to stick with throughout. You're making decisions now about how you feel about this plan so that someone can give you some thoughts that you can reconsider and accept or reject as you move forward to what you want this plan to be. And the way that this plan really functions, and I pulled a couple of things because a lot of folks aren't familiar. This town's an exception because of your exceptional growth, but a lot of folks aren't always familiar with what it means to do an architectural program. And so I always thought of the architectural program as, in the context of a school, you might think of it like an essay. It's the first part of the essay. Or I'm a science guy, so I always go back to the scientific method. It's identifying the problem. It's the starting point for solving any problem for an architect. They have to know what you want to do to make the building, and they want to make sure they make it in the right way. And if you talk to the AIA, they'll say it's the research and decision making that helps the architect and the owner establish their performance requirements, their priorities, and their design criteria for the project. And as you look through the plan that the superintendent's put together, what you see is there's class sizes, there's those facts and figures, but there's also how do you deliver special education? What role does the library play in how you educate your students? Library is always a good example because there's a lot of different ways that schools have done it over the years. A lot of us probably went to schools that had a library as a room that was within the building. But we're building schools now that have libraries that are the corridors. We're building schools, the visioning team was shown sort of as part of the how do folks look at teaching tomorrow. They showed an example of a school that built their library as the hub of the school. Everything in the school opened back on that. It was a presentation space. It was a place where people could check out books or tools to do what they wanted to do. And so there's all those opportunities out there that the educational plan is really going to be what instructs the architect on how do you want to use the building to educate students. And so it's not so much an educational or an architectural discussion, but it's an educational discussion. It's, do you push in or pull out for your special education? Do you want certain people to have their own space, or do you want people to move from space to space in how you deliver education? How does play, how does gymnasiums, how do cafeterias fit into the overall relationships between the things that are within your building? And so it really is identifying project goals and objectives for particular elements so that the design team can then take that information, process it, and turn it into shapes and sizes, along with the space program that we're developing with the MSBA guidelines, and what will fit on the site. And that it really all together will inform how we move forward into the next level.
So I heard a couple comments. The document itself, the substance and content of the document itself, I mean, if we had to vote on it tonight, I would say fine. It's fine. I'm a couple things I'm wondering. Is this document coming from the school committee? Is it coming from the district? Who is the sender?
So the district develops the document, but the school committee has to vote on it. So you either have to vote on it tonight on the 1st or next week on the 8th, because the submission date is the 9th.
Right, right. So this, I guess, part 2 of that is, as I said, the document is, I think it encompasses what we do as a district. After reading it a couple times, if we were writing the paper together, I have some stuff. But if that's sort of moot, or if this is like round 1, as you said, of, it's going to come back to us anyway, then I can wait until it comes back to us, and likely some of that stuff will be either irrelevant, or they may, who knows. So the sort of one question, I guess, if we're not going to worry about this stuff, is there's sections in here that I'm guessing are required by the MSBA because they're not relevant to Hopkinton, but they're in there anyway. Is that true?
They do give you a template, and you just keep filling it in.
Whatever it is. So that okay. So that was something. So I don't know. I mean, I don't need to go through all of the things, all the stuff.
What kinds of stuff?
It's 10, 11. I'm saying we don't need to go through all of the things.
Give us a teaser.
But I think, just little things like when we talk about, what page am I on? Page 4. There it talks about the very last sentence on page 4 says, therefore, may be assumed that these grade configurations are not seen as problematic in the community. And that sentence is also later on in the document. I can't remember what page, I have to find it, but I didn't even know, sort of, like, do we even need that sentence? Things like that. Like, I just feel like the grade configuration is what it is. I think folks have it's sort of part of the school culture of the town of Hopkinton. I don't know that it's problematic or not problematic, and that was just one of, it's those kinds of things that if we were writing this together, I'd be like, hey, let's decide if we need this. But is that the point of tonight, or can we just nix that and say the substance is what we like?
I think if there's anything in here that you significantly disagree with, right, or something that you think is a glaring omission, we probably should talk about it. Like, I wonder about that particular sentence. I don't know that the MSBA is going to mind it either way. Do you know what I mean?
Right. So
they might wonder, like, why does Hopkinton do that? Right. I mean, it just gives you a history. But I'm not married to the sentence. I could take it out.
Well, and I don't need to, especially because it's 10:15, we don't need to go paragraph by paragraph of a 43-page document with 10 people and try to decide if we're all in agreement.
So maybe we could give some general feedback, and then maybe bring it back for a shorter discussion next week. Is that, I know that we have to submit it by the 9th, but if we give what the feedback is here now, and then you can do your magic.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah, whatever.
Also,
or send the feedback.
Or send the feedback.
Because it is,
it is getting a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know that a
later
group
side.
editing session is the way to go.
Yeah. All right. So
with you.
No, but I think if you look, I had made a copy and sent
That's
some
what I did too.
comments and things. So I think, not that what I say means anything as one individual, but if it all goes in the hopper.
Yep.
And then next time we come back and, sometime between now and the next meeting, we'll get a revision, I imagine.
Yeah, if we could just make sure that I get that stuff by like Tuesday, that'll give me 48 hours to get it back together.
Exactly. All right, great. Yeah, but other than that kind of
John, yeah, come on up so we can get you on, HCAM likes to have it, make sure we're getting everybody recorded.
I literally have a quick comment, because recognize the timing too. But Jen's comment, what made me want to provide this context. So the educational plan is like almost everything else we submit to the MSBA, which while it fulfills certain requirements for them, they also really like to know that everything is trending towards approval of the project. So a line like that is designed to just make them feel like, oh, why does Hopkinton do that? But it's okay.
Okay,
And
that's
so
good context.
we obviously have a bit of unique history here in Hopkinton in terms of projects that did not go on track, but that is a focus area of theirs throughout the process of, is there any reason to believe that we're not tracking towards an easy approval come town meeting? And so I think those kinds of assurances, they're in there, that's the purpose that they serve, even though it might feel a little bit out of place.
That's helpful, and particularly helpful because you have so much experience with this process through the Marathon School as well.
And the other thing that I'll say about the grade configuration language that's within the educational plan is the MSBA knows you haven't made that decision yet. And so the educational plan might point in a direction, that's an acceptable way to do it. It might leave it open so that there's both directions open there, but it's not unusual for them to look at this and say, okay, they haven't made their decision on grade configuration yet, so they're presenting information about both possibilities, or they're trending in a direction. All of those are acceptable ways to sort of present it to the MSBA.
Great. Okay.
Thank you for that context.
So from my point of view, I looked through it and I was like, well, a lot of this isn't me. Like, this is going to be the place where, the principal, the teachers, all of them live, and they're going to create the environments for the children, and they've given a lot of feedback in here. And I don't personally know enough about what would be the greatest thing to sit and critique what our people have said and put in here. Some of it sounds amazing. The central media room sounds really great. I'm a library person, so like the idea of having a central media room, maybe with like bean bags and stuff, the kids could just really enjoy themselves there. Sounds amazing. The outdoor play spaces sound amazing. The thoughtfulness for the special education piece sounds great. And I just I feel like, if there was policy or money or whatever in here, that's more my domain.
Oh, there's money.
But I really enjoy reading all the thoughtfulness and all the kind of excitement for what the educational program might look like that's in here. So I'm perfectly happy to vote on it whenever, because like I said, I feel like it's not really my purview to say, yes or no to pieces of this.
Yep.
Right.
And yet, the school committee has to vote on it.
No,
I
agree.
somebody thinks it's our purview to at least
look at it.
I think it's make sure it's representative of the district and the town.
Yeah.
So just for people who are watching at home, this entire document is in our packet, which can be found on the town calendar on the town's website, and also should be on our website as well. So if people want to take a look at it, we always encourage that. Do we want to move on from that and come back to it?
Right.
We've got a little bit left
Make
in
sure
our
we get
agenda.
it in by the deadline.
We will get it in by the deadline.
For sure.
Thank you so much. You guys have hung in for an
Thank you.
incredibly long time for us tonight, so I
So
appreciate it.
if you'll entertain me for
Oh,
1
please.
minute, even though I'd
Of
love to go home. I heard a few things when you were talking about the grade configuration, about additional things that you'd like to hear from. A couple of things just to put out there. We did do a survey of the teachers as part of the visioning process, and we have some results from that, so we could certainly arrange to provide you all with those results. Is there anything you'd like us to bring back to you? We presented you a lot of stuff tonight. I know we presented a lot of stuff yesterday. Some of it overlaps. I heard various ideas, and I know you're preparing to make this really big decision for the town of Hopkinton. So as we're approaching that date, is there anything, and you don't have to answer now, you can feed it through John or feed it through Dr. Kavanaugh, but if there's anything you'd like to hear further from us as the project team, we're happy to do what we can to bring you the information that we have.
Quick question on this teacher survey of the teachers. Was that district-wide or was that specific to the Elmwood grades being considered at Elmwood?
I think it was open to everybody in the district.
Okay, that's great.
But some questions were specific to Elmwood.
Yes.
Yeah, there would be a place where if you weren't an Elmwood teacher, you would jump.
Okay.
If you were an Elmwood teacher, you'd stay through.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, those results would be great. Also, the public meeting yesterday where you started to introduce the 2, 3, 4 ideas, what kind of feedback you received.
Mm-hmm.
That would be wonderful to know sort of what the town is saying. Are there concerns?
And we've got that survey open for...
I don't think we picked an end date, but we've been saying 3 to 4 weeks.
But we could also poll at any time.
Yes.
So we could give you kind of a next week, here's what we've heard so far.
Yeah, that'd
be great. No, I think it's amazing that you're keeping those surveys open. I do kind of watch the HCAM numbers to see, and a lot of people are watching it after the fact. Last night, it looked like we had more live viewers than we have other times, so I think people are really tuning in, so thank you for all of that. All right.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
I have one question.
Oh, go ahead.
It might not be, I was wondering if we've ever considered having a session specifically focused on accessibility as far as like neurodivergent or mobility considerations, or if that is feedback you're getting like naturally through the forum process, because I haven't heard of watched them, I haven't heard specifically. I don't know if I'm kind of asking you for
I think that's a great question. I know that that sounds like something that should be part of the ESBC too, since they own the decisions around the building itself.
Right.
And I would want to make sure they could have that information as well. But there is a forum coming up, I know. I think it's January 24th is the next ESBC forum.
Great.
And it came up in visioning as well. People mentioned accessibility and different learning profiles of students and how they would experience the building.
Right.
And I know that during our ESBC2 meetings, we had brought up the ADA and everything, but you're right, like the specifics of what that means.
Yeah,
and
how that looks different for different kiddos.
And whether we go a little bit above or we stay to, this is like the minimum requirements, whether we want to go a little bit above whatever the minimum requirements are, like that we definitely, I don't think, had any kind of discussion on.
And I know this is late, it was just something I thought of.
It's
great, but it's a good topic.
I can try to respond to that. I think there's appropriate time in the overall process. And going back to what I said earlier about where we are with, where we are in the process, we're at the can it work?
Yeah.
So how will it work? As we move to that phase, that's where some of those discussions, some of the things that we've talked about is the idea of, as it relates to sustainability, there's a whole range of choices that are attached to a whole range of dollar figures.
Right.
And so in the same way, accessibility has a whole range of options for how you design a school, scalability to the users versus the staff versus the visitors. And so I think that we can take that feedback back to the ESBC and discuss it in the context of future forums. I put that timeline up, I won't get it back out, but we've had 3 forums so far. We had a kickoff and then 3 forums that each had their own agendas. We're expecting to have another forum in late January. We're having initial discussions about having a daytime forum for some of the folks who may not have been captured in those evening forums, particularly seniors or young moms. And then we'll have future forums as the design continues to evolve on a specific design as opposed to our consideration of various options.
Okay.
So just to give you some context for the overall process.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. right, have a good night.
Thank you.
So we're going to go back into the agenda where we jumped, which was back to the school committee chair report. I will be very brief. The payroll warrant S20010, warrants 23-022, 23-023, 23-024, and 23-026 have been approved. Copy, as always, is included in the packet. Also did want to say that I went to the CPC meeting for our 2 projects on Tuesday. Is that right? We were there Tuesday. We did receive some feedback from CPC, and we are bringing the capital projects back to those 2 capital, the entire capital budget back to discuss next week, and that will incorporate, I'm sure, the feedback that we received from CPC as well as an opportunity for us to discuss at this point. And then, are there liaison reports? Okay. Oh, the other one thing I did want to say was that I appreciated your counts of the emails that we received, because I did not go back and count them. But I did hear you say that we had received 48 emails on the special education budget.
Yeah.
We also received a couple others on grade configuration.
Right, yep.
I have tried my best to keep up to date, but I did fall behind on a couple today, so that people who have emailed today who have not received a response will receive a response by tomorrow. So that just...
You've been doing a great job.
Yeah.
You are. We are all indebted to you.
Well, I appreciate the feedback that we receive, and I want to make sure that people know that it's valued and that we are reading and hearing it. So
I saw them go out at 11:15. And I was like, yeah, we should be sleeping.
Right. Yeah, the night before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
The chair is really a servant of the committee. You're working really hard.
We pay you in coffee or tea or whatever that is.
I appreciate it. So if nobody has a liaison report, we can jump down to the central office budget, which we also passed over.
And I'll do the speaking for that. So the central office budget represents an increase of 20%. And the reason for that is within the personnel summary, this is where we carry the salary reserve on an annual basis. And then once the salaries are negotiated, they're pushed out into the specific line items. So this is where it always looks like a large increase, but it's not. It's just a typical way of doing business. There are no new positions requested for central office. For the expense line, there's an increase of 13%, which really represents an estimate for the increase for transportation. We're at the end of our contract. We'll be going out to bid for a new contract, so this is an estimate for that increase. The hope is that it is a high estimate, and that once I get the bids in, hopefully we can reduce this number. And it also includes an addition of another bus at an estimated cost of $81,000 for that. The other small increase in expenses is within superintendent dues and professional development of $5,800, and that's really just increased costs for organizations in whole, but also for other opportunities for central office administrators. And last but not least, the increased cost for supplies that we've heard from everybody. So again, really the big driver within central office is the transportation.
Just a point of clarification, when it says the superintendent supplies, I assume that actually means all of central office?
All of central office,
I
that's
wanted to know
correct.
if you're getting something swanky.
Yeah,
otherwise.
you're getting some cool supplies there.
Right. You're not getting the orange folders with the 2 prongs. You're
Get it in color I want.
She shares.
Are there questions on the central office budget?
Just on transportation, is it a very competitive landscape? Will we be getting more than
That's my question.
multiple bids? I know it in the past hasn't always worked out that way.
We will never get more than one bid, and that is statewide. It just doesn't happen. I mean, that's the reality, and the state knows that.
It does feel like
non-competitive.
Yes, that exactly. But it does feel like maybe something that I would want to reach out, I know that the state is aware of it, but it does seem like it is problematic, not just for our district, but for many districts in the state. If you're only getting one bid, I would think that the contractors that are bidding on it would have an incentive to bid lower if they thought there were going to be 2 other bids.
Right, but what they do is, they do look at what their neighbor bid. So you can pretty much look at what is being charged, even by other companies across other towns. They won't, just because they know they have our territory.
Right.
They'll all stay within the neighborhood.
Okay. And I remember the last time we did the bus contract, we moved to a bigger bus. Was that the
Yes,
last time?
yeah.
And I'm assuming we're staying the same with the sizes and the types of buses that we
are, so currently we have a 77 passenger bus.
Yep.
When you go to an 83, there is one size bigger, but when you go to an 83, you have to have, it has air brakes. It's a different motor, it's a different, it's different. So when somebody is trained to use a bus with air brakes, they typically go and drive trucks. So we lose drivers. So a lot of times we will lose drivers once they get their license. We do lose them because it's free training, and then they go and drive a truck. But if we train them also with air brakes, there's a higher rate of loss. So we won't go to an 83 passenger. It's not a huge gain in the number of students.
I would think louder.
Yeah.
I would think our neighbors in town may not appreciate that.
You heard from Mrs. Carver that we don't really need any more students on one
Yes,
bus.
I agree. Are there questions from others?
And I'm just curious about the salary reserves. So you set aside a certain amount of money for contract negotiations. So is that like a percentage above or below what you expected the salary to be for whoever you're hiring?
So for 23, we set aside contract for the teachers, the nurses, the custodians. So there's always a group of staff for which we still need to do contract negotiations.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Jean, do you have anything from appropriations?
I do not. Thank you very much.
Okay. That is great. That concludes all of our initial budget presentations. We will come back next week with appropriations in the select board and discuss overall, and we will have lots of chances between now and January 19th to discuss and move forward with the direction. And on the agenda, it does list the superintendent's budget recommendation as December 15th. Is that what we are on track?
I think so.
Okay. All right, then I'm going to scooch down to the bottom of the agenda and move into items by consensus.
Did you want to do budget transfers?
Oh, I am sorry. I did not intend to. Please.
So hopefully this is good. This is what is a result of your salary reserve. So these budget transfers takes the salary reserve for this year and splits it out into the appropriate lines as contracts were negotiated.
Questions? Anybody feel compelled to make a motion?
I sure do. I move to approve the budget transfers.
Second.
Okay, motion by Jen, a second by Leah. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. And any opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you very much for bringing that forward. And now we're moving into items by consensus.
Okay, Superintendent, I recommend the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Leah. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jen. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Any opposed? And the motion carries. And then I would seek a motion to adjourn at this time.
So moved.
Motion by Leah. Is there a second?
Sure, I'll second.
Second by Jen. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. And we are adjourned at 10:33. Thank you for everybody here and also at home for hanging in with us. Our next meeting is next Thursday, December 8th, the joint meeting, and then again on the 15th, all of which will take place here. Thank you all and have a good night. Thank you.
1, 2, 3, 4.